Valhalla is one of the best institutes for hunters, with countless people trying to join every year. However, not many people manage to enroll, and less than 150 people even make it to graduation. The selection round takes the form of a battle between candidates for admission. All of this is closely observed by the highest-ranking combat instructor, Adam. Suddenly, Kevin approaches him. He is the heir of the important Yoshin family. Adam immediately asks if Kevin came here just to see his niece. The man answers yes, because in their family everyone expects great success from Olivia. Olivia is a child genius born into one of the top 5 families in Korea, and at the age of 10 she already had the mana capacity of a high school student. At 13, she was able to transfer mana into her sword, and at 16, she competed with her family members and won. Adam asked Kevin if there was anything he didn't know about his niece, and the man replied that they said she could communicate with her family's guardian constellation. The instructor was shocked by what the man answered him. He asks if Kevin really believes this. The man says yes with complete confidence, because that is why he expects a lot from her. The 5 main families have been given their status in Korea because guardian constellations are associated with each of them. Ordinary hunters receive blessings or make a contract with a constellation. But the guardian constellations of the 5 families are different from others. The Yoshin family is the god of swords. Everyone in their family is an excellent swordsman. The Jones family, Holy Spear with the help of mana, can create a spear from any stick that is in no way inferior to a stone one. The Chojin family, Dao King. Despite the shape of their Dao blades, they are amazing at fighting with them, which is beyond the capabilities of other people. The Davis family is the king of the fist, and they have no equal in physical strength. The Dojin family is the god of the bow and can hit any moving object, even the smallest one, with an arrow from any distance. Adam says that if Olivia can actually communicate with her guardian constellation, then she is definitely a genius. Before Olivia's fight even begins, Kevin asks the instructor to also watch his niece. Adam says that in that case, he will have to go down and go through the whole crowd of spectators and reporters. Kevin objects and tells Adam to simply put what's happening on screen. The man fulfilled the request, as he himself became interested in looking at it. The Yoshin family's eldest daughter, 17-year-old Olivia, appears on the screen. Her opponent turned out to be a guy named Adrien. He is not a member of any of the 5 main families and almost nothing is known about him. Adam, seeing the guy, says that he is quite calm, to which Kevin suggests that he has probably already given up, since he knows who Olivia is. Meanwhile, Olivia was already eagerly awaiting the start of the fight. Adrien, on the contrary, became bored, which is why he even began to yawn. Continuing to assess Olivia's opponent, the instructor said that the guy seemed to have no fighting spirit at all, and Kevin was completely confident that the fight would end quickly in favor of his niece. So, with 3 seconds left until the start, Olivia readied her sword. 2 seconds before the start, all Adrien did was start to massage his shoulder, while remaining completely calm. When there was 1 second left, the girl's eyes were already full of determination. As soon as the test began, she immediately ran towards the enemy. Olivia, holding the sword with both hands, swung it hard. With a light movement, she cut through the air in front of her, creating a blade of mana. The blade rushed straight towards Adrien. At the last moment, when the blade was about to touch him, he managed to dodge, keeping a mocking smile on his face. Everyone around was taken aback, as absolutely no one expected such an outcome of events. Adrien had won, and from the look on his face it was clear that he had expected nothing less. He wondered why everyone around him was so weak, and if it was true that this was the future 300 years from now. Let's go back 300 years to the Tower of Destruction. A wounded Barie, the Tower of Destruction boss and God of Destruction, tells Adrien that their battle was excellent. Adrien, who was also the god of martial arts, was also seriously injured just like Barie. But the guy was able to find the strength in himself and dealt the final blow to the God of Destruction with a kick right in the head. Adrien wins, and at that moment, a system message appears in front of him, which says that he defeated the boss of the Tower of Destruction and the destruction of the world was stopped. At that moment, the tower began to collapse rapidly. Adrien thought that this was the end, since due to the wound he could not leave the tower. And after this mission, he was finally going to rest. He had already begun to regret that he had gone to the tower alone, forbidding his disciples to go with him. But he quickly realized that if they had been with him, they would all have died in agony. Adrien had already accepted his imminent death and realized that he could not change anything. But suddenly he wakes up in the body of a 17-year-old boy, 300 years after the victory over the Tower of Destruction. He was pleased with his reincarnation. Although his body was not as strong as before, he still had all his past knowledge. One day, the system message appeared in front of him again, but this time it said that in 5 years the Tower of Destruction would appear again, and he needed to prepare. He began to think that he should have destroyed the enemy completely then, but he decided that it would not help now, and next time he would destroy the tower forever. The guy decided that after fulfilling his duty, he would live a life of prosperity. Immediately after that message, another one followed, telling him to return his weapons and memories to Valhalla School on the 3rd floor, in the 5th room on the right. Adrien was sure that he understood what kind of weapon they were talking about, but he didn't understand what kind of memories they were talking about. He decided to look for Valhalla. And now, the 4th day of the top 10 competition is starting, and the guy hears that those who want to take part should go up to the competition floor. Once everyone had entered the testing area, an announcement was made for everyone to take their positions. Instructor Adam is watching the events again. He noticed that there are more people today than ever before, probably because all 5 main families are gathered here. Adrien's opponent this time was a guy named Jon. Jon is a muscular 17-year-old boy and the eldest son of the Davis family. Jon immediately recognized his opponent today, Adrien. He thought that if he could defeat his opponent, his image would improve. The King of the Fist told his opponent that he would destroy him quickly and that he didn't even have to try. At this, Adrien told Jon to go to hell and showed the middle finger, at which point the fight began. After what Adrien said, Jon became furious. He was never distinguished by his mental abilities or success in creativity. His talent was in his physical strength. He was born with superior physical abilities, and even the slightest training made him stronger. He could do things that others could only do with mana. Adrien, meanwhile, continued to show his middle finger and mock Jon. Then Jon concentrated all his mana into his fist and rushed at the enemy. Adrien understood that he would not be able to win physically and decided that he would win with the help of agility and cunning. Jon's fist was rapidly approaching his opponent's face, but Adrien, with one deft tilt of his head, quickly dodged the blow. He then took advantage of the fact that his opponent was pushing gravity forward and hit him in the legs, causing Jon to fall. The guy didn't expect this. He was confident of his victory before it happened. Without wasting a second, Adrien delivered a decisive blow to Jon's stomach, causing his opponent to fall and lose consciousness. Adrien won again, and once again realized that although his body was weaker than before, it did not create much of a hindrance. The whole thing was being watched by Jon's father, the head of the Davis family, who immediately realized that Adrien had won through his own cunning. He understood and comprehended the boy's entire combat tactics. He understood that his son could dodge any attack, but not this one, because in this case, all of Adrien's movements were clearly planned. The man concluded that he was moving even faster than his son's top speed. He figured out the guy's brilliant plan and realized all its genius. He was delighted and horrified at the same time. The head of the Davis family decided that he would bring Adrien into his family, no matter what it cost him. As he went out to fight his next opponent, the boy did not understand why grown men were shouting words from the spectator seats, calling a 17-year-old girl a big sister. Adrien's rival was a 17-year-old girl named Roxy, who was the second daughter of the Chojin family. The match began, but neither opponent was in a hurry to attack first. Adrien was surprised that the girl waited and prepared, because all his opponents before this had attacked rather thoughtlessly. He concluded that she was better than the others because she could understand the situation. Then the guy became interested and decided to start moving towards the girl. Roxy immediately began to take out the blade, fill it with mana, and change the element, producing lightning. All the spectators were taken aback by what they saw, because she is only 17 years old, and she already has such serious skills. The opponents approached each other. The girl continued to quickly draw her sword, and the guy simply grinned. The girl's eyes were full of determination and confidence. She made a sharp movement of her hand and struck towards Adrien and was bound to hit. But somehow he managed to dodge. The girl was perplexed. The guy said she had a chance if she hadn't shown with her eyes where she would hit. Roxy was taken aback, and Adrien was already standing next to her, ready to take the next step towards victory. He launched a mana strike straight into the girl's chest, thinking that this strike would be decisive. But Roxy was only thrown back by the shockwave. She remained on her feet and did not lose her balance. Adrien realized that he didn't feel what was hitting his body, and the girl was able to block the blow with her sword. Goosebumps ran through the girl's body from how strong the blow was. While Roxy was shocked, Adrien wasted no time in delivering his next blow. He struck straight at the girl's sword with incredible force. She had not yet had time to recover from the previous blow, when the sword, which was aimed with its blade right at the girl's ribs, struck her. Roxy was unable to react and defend herself, causing her to fall. Adrien noticed that something was wrong with his blow, but he didn't focus on it, since the girl was defeated anyway. The guy once again defeated a representative of one of the main families. Adrien was #1 on the list of Valhalla's qualifying trials, entering Valhalla. After the competition, the winner was surrounded by reporters. Each of them urged the boy to join their guild, shouting out certain benefits. Adrien was very angry about this. You could tell from his face that he was furious, and he sent everyone to hell, showing the middle finger. News of this ignoramus quickly spread across the internet. All the comments were filled with people's indignation. Everyone was talking about his bad manners, but the guy didn't care about it. And so the first day of his training in Valhalla arrived. The guy was not at all interested in hearing about the school's 100-year history, and he was immersed in his thoughts. He noticed that the other students recognized him and showed attention to his person. Adrien had already begun to wonder if he had gone too far yesterday, but he quickly realized that he didn't care what others thought. The guy suddenly remembered the recent system message that had appeared in front of him recently. He remembered that he was only here to get his weapons and memories back. Immediately after the introductory lecture, he quickly left the school with the thought of how to quickly get to the 5th room on the right on the 3rd floor of the school. He headed to his next lesson, which was to take place in the virtual combat simulation room. A young, 24-year-old teacher named Chris was already waiting for the group in the office. The teacher was perplexed by the fact that 3 representatives of the main families were placed in one class at once. Yes, Roxy, Jon, and Olivia will be in the same class. But when the teacher noticed another guy in the group, he was shocked. Adrien was also assigned to his class. The teacher immediately realized that the year would be very difficult, but he could not remain in thought for long. He calmed down and began the lecture. Chris greeted the students and announced that he was their class teacher. Without waiting long, he decided to start the lesson right away, sharply pressing some button. The space around the students began to change rapidly, and all the students became very scared as they did not understand what was happening. And so they found themselves somewhere in the forest among the trees. Even Adrien was taken aback by this. He immediately began to look around, studying the area. Suddenly, the students began to be surrounded by angry monsters. The students were even more scared, as no one expected this to happen in their first lesson. Jon immediately assessed the situation, realizing that these monsters were orcs and goblins and that their numbers were quite large. Looking back, the guy returned his head to its previous position and was immediately taken aback by the fact that right in front of his face was already the hand of one of the monsters. The goblin tried to attack Jon, but he failed because the students were protected by the dome shield. This solid creation was the work of teacher Chris, who was watching the proceedings with a grin. The monsters continued to try to attack the students, but the barrier did its job. While all the students were distracted by what was happening, Adrien heard his teacher calling him. He calmly approached Chris, not suspecting what he was about to offer him. The teacher mockingly asked if the boy would be able to cope with all the monsters on his own. Chris was sure that the students had only seen monsters in books, and by making such an offer to Adrien, he thought that it would humble the boy's ego. But Adrien simply laughed at the teacher's question. Chris was taken aback, not expecting such a reaction. He repeated the question again, hoping that the guy was just bluffing, but he replied that he could handle it without any difficulty. The teacher, still in a state of shock, shouted at Adrien to try it since he was so brave. The student knew that such tasks were usually not given at the first lesson and demanded a reward if he managed to destroy all the monsters. The teacher did not expect such impudence but did not object and promised to fulfill any request within his authority. Adrien agreed to such a reward. Chris warned the student that although the monsters were just a system, they attacked like real ones, to which Adrien simply asked the teacher to give him his sword. The teacher, with distrust but without objection, handed his weapon to the boy. Adrien was flattered by this. He took a good look at the blade and prepared for battle. And then the barrier in front of him disappeared, and he headed towards the orcs. The students abruptly turned their attention from the monsters to the guy who decided that he could win on his own. And then fury flashed in Adrien's eyes, and he struck the first blow, cutting down several monsters at once. With each blow, he destroyed more and more monsters. The orcs tried to attack Adrien from behind, but they were unsuccessful. The guy dodged all the attacks every time and delivered his own blow. He thought that 300 years had passed since he last held a sword in his hands. At that time, the world could not function fully due to monsters, and improvised means were used as weapons. Lost in thought, he didn't notice how an enraged goblin was already trying to attack him from behind. But as usual, the guy dodged his attack. He had long ago realized that the monsters here moved according to a simple pattern. All these monsters are just well-made fakes. The teacher and his students watched closely as Adrien easily destroyed all the orcs and goblins. Chris was incredibly surprised by what was happening, as the sword he gave to Adrien was completely ordinary. The way the guy cut through all the monsters was truly amazing, because there was not a drop of magic in the sword. Olivia watched everything with a very displeased face. To Jon, everything that was happening seemed completely crazy, and only Roxy looked at it with complete admiration. And so, Adrien defeated all the monsters. He immediately said that his desire was to go down to the room of the constellations. With a smirk on his face, he asked Chris if their agreement was still in force. The teacher clearly didn't expect the boy to ask for something like that. And now, the environment has changed again to the familiar office. Chris will announce the end of the lecture. All the students began to leave, and only Adrien could not get up from his place. He was very exhausted after the battle with the monsters. The boy didn't expect that lessons could last so long, since he had never studied at school. His only desire was to find what he needed and quickly leave this place. As he left the school building, he once again became immersed in his thoughts. Even though the lessons today were rather boring for him, he still learned something new about constellations, because in his past life there was no such thing as constellations at all. Constellations are those who have achieved greatness and become gods. Most of them are associated with hunters and give them special powers. And Valhalla is the third largest academy in the world, which contains many relics of the constellations. And so Adrien walked, thinking that he needed to quickly return to the dorm and start training martial arts, since his body was too weak. He was distracted from his thoughts by a female voice that called out to him from somewhere behind. Turning around, he saw Roxy behind him. At this time, an important conversation was taking place in the teacher's room between teacher Chris and instructor Adam. The teacher was talking about how what happened in class today was humiliating for him. He wondered if Adrien was really just a high school student. Adam was very shocked that a guy who had never even seen monsters was able to single-handedly defeat 120 monsters. It was really very strange because Adrien had never seemed special to anyone. Adam explained that Adrien was an orphan and lived in a small orphanage located in a very dangerous area. Chris suggested that the guy might be a spy, but the instructor quickly refuted this, saying that he had already conducted his own investigation and found nothing strange. Moreover, the spy would hardly attract so much attention with his behavior and enter Valhalla. Adam remembered that Chris told him about Adrien's request after defeating the monsters. The instructor decided to touch on this topic. He considered the guy's request strange, since he himself could have gotten there after the first semester, but he decided to offer his help and negotiate with the director about this. The instructor thought that if the guy visited this place earlier, nothing bad would happen. Chris said that he was worried about there being so many geniuses in his class, to which Adam, rushing to console the teacher, said that there was a student from the Ventri family in another class. This guy is from the main Ventri family and his name is Bob Ventri. The teacher heard that this guy was expelled from the British Academy because he was causing trouble. This news made Chris calm down and realize that things weren't so bad in his class compared to the one next door. Let's get back to what's happening between Adrien and Roxy at this time. Adrien turned around, waiting for what the girl would tell him. Roxy asked the boy in a determined voice to teach her how to wield a sword. The guy was completely indifferent to this request, taking it seriously. The girl continued to insist on her own and repeated her request. The guy's face at that moment twisted in an expression of complete incomprehension. He clearly didn't expect such a proposal. The girl said that she absolutely needed to learn fencing, which Adrien had demonstrated then. The guy listened to everything the girl said with absolutely no interest, scratched his ear, and refused. Roxy, who expected a different answer, asked why he refused, to which Adrien said that he simply didn't want to, adding that he would leave if the girl had nothing more to say. She repeated her request once again. What was happening began to irritate the guy very much. He said again that he did not want to do anything with her. He rather rudely ordered Roxy to get away from him and, turning sharply, walked away, leaving the girl alone with herself. And now a new school day has arrived. All the students have already come to school. Adrien thought again about how weak his body was, that it didn't even have magical abilities. But he decided that this problem would be solved when he found what the system message told him. His thoughts were interrupted by a guy who, unnoticed by Adrien, appeared right in front of his desk. It was the 17-year-old son of the main family, Ventri, Bob Ventri, and next to him stood his companion, 17-year-old Alice. Bob, with a smirk on his face, called Adrien by name, to which the guy asked him who he was. The Ventri family representative then thought that the guy was very uneducated since he didn't know his family. Bob introduced himself and with an evil grimace on his face asked if Adrien wanted to become strong. If you delve a little into the structure of the main families, you will notice that it is much more difficult for representatives of the side branches to obtain status compared to the main branch. However, the Ventri family has a beaked mask, which is what sets them apart from other families. Usually, a family has a constellation guardian of S-class or higher who protects that family, and they choose a family member and give him power. But in the Ventric family, things are different. The guardians may decide to sign a contract with a family member who is not a constellation. Thanks to this distinction, the Ventric family has enormous influence throughout Europe. This also implies that your bloodline doesn't matter at all, as a side branch can have the same power as the main one. Bob Ventric became too arrogant when he felt he had power, which led him to do bad things, and he was expelled from the British Academy. But he didn't take the problem seriously, because thanks to his pedigree, he always gets what he wants. After thinking about how he always got everything, he looked towards Alice with a nasty smile. Bob knew his family could always get him back on track, but he knew he had to get Adrien on his side first. And so, Ventric, standing right in front of the desk where Adrien was sitting, told him that he would lead the boy to his family's constellation if he was on his side. Adrien, with a completely displeased face, asked if Bob was an idiot by any chance. This answer hit Ventric's pride hard, and he was stunned. The girl accompanying him was very embarrassed. Having come to his senses, Bob asked Adrien again what he had told him. The guy said that he was far from stupid, and he immediately understood from Bob's manner of communication that he just wanted to use him. Ventric was furious after hearing this, calling Adrien a dirty and uneducated man. In a fit of rage, he didn't notice how Instructor Adam had already entered the office. The boy was distracted only after the teacher asked him to return to his seat. Bob shouted at the instructor not to use his full name, and Adam replied that Valhalla had different rules than the British Academy. The guy got angry but did not continue the conflict. He just looked very unhappy and angry. He quickly headed towards the door, and Alice followed him. As he left the office, he told Adrien that they would need to talk again, to which Adrien said nothing. Now all the classes are over, and the students once again leave the walls of the educational institution. This time, Adrien was thinking about how he hadn't learned anything new today, but again he was distracted from his own thoughts by Roxy. The girl repeated the same phrase as yesterday, asking the guy to teach her fencing. The guy looked at her with a very displeased face. At this time, an enraged Bob was in the elite dorm room of Valhalla. He circled around and even broke a very expensive lamp with his own fist. Ventric thought about Adrien's insolence, how a lower class could dare to humiliate him like that. He eventually ordered Alice to call another Ventric named Larry and tell him that there was something he needed to do. The girl, without responding to Bob's order, simply looked down at the floor. The guy was already very angry at this point, and the girl's silence was the last straw. He came up and grabbed her by the hair with all his might. Without removing his hand from Alice's head, he demanded that she give him an answer immediately. In a very furious tone of voice, he asked if she still considered herself the eldest daughter of the palace family. He continued to put moral pressure on her, asking if she wanted him to throw her out of the family, to which the extremely frightened girl answered in the negative. Bob threw the defenseless girl with incredible force so that she fell with her whole body right on the floor. Ventric, without an ounce of compassion for the girl, simply repeated his order again, adding that he wanted to get rid of one person. He also said that he wanted to meet the son of the Rice family, who was a second-year student at Valhalla, and demanded that a meeting be arranged with him. This time, the exhausted girl responded obediently. Let's move to Adrien's room, where he trained before going to bed. He trained his abilities to handle mana and attract magic, but he couldn't do anything. He started to think that his body was just trash. Suddenly, he remembered his conversation with Roxy today, who had approached him again after school with the same request. He was very unhappy with her persistence at that moment. The girl continued to follow the guy for a long time, and when he turned around, she simply repeated her request over and over again. The guy simply asked her if she was tired of following him around and if she was a parrot. This began to irritate Adrien quite a bit, and he began to think about how to make her leave. He said that the amount for one lesson would be 10 million won. The girl hesitated, and the guy said that if she couldn't afford it, then he was leaving. Then she sharply asked him to give her his phone number. The guy asked why she needed his phone, but he didn't stop her and obediently handed her his gadget. Roxy said she would write her number down there, explaining that it would make it easier for her to transfer money to him. After that, she immediately gave the phone back to Adrien, who clearly did not expect such an outcome. Turning on his phone, he saw that 100 million won had been credited to his account at once. He was a girl who could afford to pay for 10 lessons at once. Roxy asked again if the guy would now agree to teach her. Adrien, smiling sarcastically, said that he still wouldn't do it and simply refused to accept the money. And so, thinking about everything that had happened before going to bed, he wondered how the student could transfer such a huge amount of money at once. He began to regret that he had refused such a sum, but quickly came to the conclusion that it was even for the best. because he would not have to reveal his secrets. Adrien knew that his main goal at the moment was to find what the system message was talking about. He quickly got dressed, took a shovel, and went to look for the secret storage. And now he is already determined to start searching. Lost in thought, he thought about how he had checked everything in advance before entering Valhalla. But all the important records from 300 years ago had been destroyed. He understood that most likely there were only 3 parts of the records left. Although the sources say that there are 4, most likely they were located in the mountains of Valhalla. Adrien began to emit mana, which began to fill the space around him. This helped him find records that responded to his magic. The guy could do all this, even with a tiny amount of magic. And then one part started to glow blue. The guy quickly found it. He began to dig in the place where the light was coming from. This required a huge reserve of physical strength, which this guy's body did not have. But despite this, he continued to dig. The guy thought that if it weren't for the Tower of Destruction 300 years ago, he wouldn't have buried them at all. He finished excavating only at dawn. The tired guy stood near the hatch and couldn't believe that he had finally managed to do it. He quickly found the keyhole that opened the hatch leading down. Since a normal key couldn't open it, Adrien began making a key from his own mana. He did it quickly enough and proceeded to open the hatch. The guy was very exhausted, but at the same time happy that he had succeeded. And so he opened the hatch and climbed down, landing on a mountain of jewels. Adrien, standing in a victorious pose, looked at all the wealth surrounding him at that moment. Now he could not worry about money for a long time, but he came here not only for wealth, he was looking for storage stones. The guy quickly discovered them and began to pour a small amount of mana into them to activate them. In return, they gave him even more magic. Now that it was time to go back, he thought about how to get all this money and gold. It's a new school day at Valhalla School. Since Adrien worked physically all night instead of sleeping, he did not have time to rest and came to class in a terrible state. Suddenly, Roxy came up to him. The guy even got a little scared from the surprise. Roxy, indeed, repeated the same thing like a parrot, asking Adrien to teach her the art of swordsmanship. The guy was no longer angry. He calmly asked why the girl still couldn't calm down. He learned that her family, which is one of the main ones, is the best in swordsmanship. Adrien said that she will get more information from her family. To this, Roxy replied that she wanted to learn from him, and no one else would suit her, since Adrien was the best in swordsmanship of anyone she had seen. The guy became embarrassed and asked what about her father, since he was the head of Chojin. The girl's face immediately changed. She became colder and her gaze became glassy. At this point, their conversation was interrupted by teacher Chris, who called Adrien to go to the teacher's room. The guy asked him again why he specifically needed to go there. The teacher said that this was related to what they talked about last time. Adrien immediately became inspired, grinned, and began to get up to quickly follow Chris to the teacher's room. Roxy felt awkward, and when the guy was already leaving, she called out to him and asked for forgiveness. She looked down at the floor, losing all hope that the boy would eventually agree to teach her. And suddenly, Adrien turns around and sets a date for the classes. He said that it will happen tomorrow at 6 in the morning on the training ground. The girl was taken aback, and the guy asked again if she had changed her mind. This question brought the girl to her senses, and she began to rhythmically shake her head from side to side. Then she said that she would definitely come. Now Adrien had already come to the teacher's room, waiting for what the teacher would tell him. Chris said that the boy was approved for a pass to the constellation room. This news made the student very happy. But then the teacher said that the guy would just have to go down to the basement. Adrien, not expecting this, asked again if he had heard everything correctly. Chris answered this question positively and added that the guy would not be allowed to go below the first floor. Adrien, not listening to what Chris was trying to say next, asked when he could go there. To this, the teacher said that he could come tonight if he had the opportunity. Adrien said that he would come. The teacher was confused that the boy did not argue about the ban on the second floor. He did not think that Adrien would agree so easily. After that, Chris said that the conversation was over and the guy could go. And so the night came. Chris and Adrien came to the appointed place. The guy immediately began to look around, studying the area. He noticed that there were at least 2 guards at each door. Also, all the outer walls were very well protected by all types of magic. Adrien asked if he could ask teacher Chris one more question, but the teacher responded positively. Then he asked how hard it was to get down to the second floor and whether it was necessary to do something criminal to do this. The teacher said that it was not difficult and no crime was needed, but if the boy did it, he would be expelled. Moreover, Adrien will go crazy before he can even leave school. He explained this by saying that the second floor contains the terrifying magic of the constellations, and if you touch it, it tears apart the consciousness, and the person goes crazy. The guy grinned, said that he understood everything and started moving towards the entrance. Chris could only hope that Adrien was smart enough not to go down to the second floor. The teacher only had time to shout that Adrien had 30 minutes to do everything. The guy replied that he would be back soon and entered the building. Upon entering, he immediately opened a message in the system to refresh his memory and quickly find everything. He didn't care whether he was expelled or not because he came to Valhalla only for this. And so he began to go down to the third floor. He walked, surprised that there were a lot of steps in this building. And so he found himself in some strange hall and assumed that it was a prison. He was sure that on the first floor there was a room of constellations, but everything indicated that it was indeed a prison. While the guy was thinking, the system message appeared in front of him again, which said that Adrien had fulfilled the conditions and would be moved to the room. The space around the bewildered Adrien began to change rapidly. When he moved, what he saw shocked him. Before him stood the god of destruction, Barie, whom Adrien had fought 300 years ago in the Tower of Destruction. The guy couldn't get over his shock and simply asked if it was really Barie. The god of destruction gave a positive answer and said mockingly that this reunion should take place after 300 years. Without giving Barie time to finish, Adrien had already delivered the first blow straight to his opponent's jaw. In the midst of his emotions, he dealt a fairly powerful blow, knocking the god of destruction off his feet. He shouted that it was incredible to see Barie, while his face expressed genuine anger. Barie tried to stop it and asked the guy to stop, but it didn't help. Adrien's fist landed on the god of destruction's jaw again. The beaten man did not lose hope of stopping the blows and again tried to ask the guy not to do it. Adrien, not listening to what Barie was telling him, continued to hit him and scream, telling him to die. And then the guy finally stopped. Having let off all his steam on Barie, he said that he usually does not use fists to sort things out. The god of destruction thought at that moment that there would be no more blows in his direction. But he was wrong. Adrien raised his leg and kicked Barie, who was lying on the floor. With all his might, he did this in revenge for what happened 300 years ago. The guy was about to strike again, but he was distracted by a question that Barie asked. He asked why the guy wasn't interested in what kind of place was around them. Then Adrien became really interested in it. He started looking around and realized that there was nothing around, only emptiness. Barie had just gotten to his feet by this time and was shaking off the dust, while telling the guy that they were in a world of imagination, or more precisely, a space and a relic. Adrien was surprised, as it turned out that in front of him stood only the incarnation of Barie in the world of imagination, and his real body was destroyed 300 years ago. He asked the god of destruction if he understood correctly that he had been inside the relic all this time, to which Barie responded in the affirmative. This fact meant that Barie himself had now become a constellation. Adrien's face turned into a furious grimace again, and he struck his opponent in the face again. And now, the time the guy had to stay on the first floor, allocated by teacher Chris, had expired, and the teacher was already waiting for the guy at the entrance. And so Adrien finally came out, the guards checked him, and he went towards the teacher. Chris immediately asked if the guy had done anything strange. The boy replied that he, of course, did nothing because he was afraid of going crazy, and the teacher, after these words, told him to go home. Then Adrien simply turned around and actually walked towards the house as the teacher had told him to. He walked, once again replaying the conversation with Barie in his head, remembering all the details. Then he asked Barie whether he was the creator of that pop-up message in the system or not. And what was it anyway? The god of destruction simply said he had no idea. For this, Adrien grabbed Barie by the collar of his suit and lifted him up, swinging his fist. Barie, frightened, said that he was telling the absolute truth. And in general, he had been locked up here for 300 years after that battle. Then the guy put him down on the ground and asked who was sending the messages then. Adrien listened attentively, as Barie said that he too had been sent a message that spoke of Adrien being reborn. He said that thanks to this, a suspicious person surfaced who possibly made him the owner of the Tower of Destruction. But Barie didn't know who this man was, since his memories had not yet fully returned. He asked Adrien what was in his notice, and the boy told him everything without hesitation. But he didn't understand what kind of memories he was talking about. It seemed to him that he already remembered everything that happened in the tower 300 years ago, down to the smallest detail. Barie suggested that the guy thought so because his memories had not returned yet. But this would happen soon since he had already found the weapon. Adrien, not understanding what was being discussed, asked what weapon Barie was talking about. The god of destruction replied that this place was the inner world of the 4 village swords that had become sacred relics. He added that he became a constellation because he used the sword as a relic. This suddenly sent Adrien into a fit of rage again, and he began shouting insults at Barie. Remembering all this on the way home, Adrien still couldn't understand how his village sword became a relic with a constellation inside. He wanted to destroy this artifact and leave it there, but he also did not want to leave Barie unattended and took the sword with him. Besides, most likely, the new task from the system would have been impossible to complete without this sword. Once again, his thoughts were interrupted by a voice calling out to him from behind, asking if he was the winner of the Valhalla qualifying trials. Turning around, the guy saw a gang of guys who were clearly hostile. They said that they were older than Adrien, demanding respect. The gang was led by a second-year student at Valhalla Academy, who was also the eldest son of the Sunrise family, Eric. Adrien, keeping the absolute, asked if bullies like them could also have juniors. The gang members really didn't like the fact that the guy wasn't scared at all, and on the contrary, he was showing impudence. And then one guy from the gang, completely confident in his abilities and not seeing a threat in Adrien, volunteered to be the first to beat the guy up. As soon as he took the first step towards Adrien, he immediately kicked him in the stomach. Adrien, in anticipation of the fight, urged the guy to start quickly. He delivered the next blow by jumping into the air and hitting with the same foot, but this time in the face. The guy could not resist such a blow. He simply did not have time and was defeated. The blow sent the bully flying straight into the crowd of his gang. The blow was so strong that when the guy had already fallen, but continued to roll along the ground by inertia, an impressive track was left behind him. At this moment, the guy's confidence diminished a little. Eric looked at Adrien, who already had his artifact sword in his hands. He didn't understand how the guy ended up with a weapon, since he definitely didn't have one just now. At that moment, Adrien's eyes sparkled and a slight madness appeared on his face. He said that if everyone stood like a pillar, he would smash everyone's skulls. Let's go back 3 hours to when Bob was talking to Eric in his house. He told Eric to take care of one first-year student, meaning Adrien. Of course, he promised a reward in the form of helping Eric's family. Bob said that even the use of weapons was allowed, explaining that with the help of his connections, he would be able to hush everything up. Eric, without thinking twice and having no idea who Adrien was, agreed. When he left, he thought that they would easily deal with Adrien, since he was only a first-year student. And the differences between first and second years were quite significant. Valhalla students go to the Constellation Room in the second semester of their first year and make a contract with a constellation, only then do they become sophomores. The thought that Adrien didn't have a contract with a constellation yet and wasn't a member of a special family, which meant he didn't have a guardian constellation, was very encouraging to Eric. But everything turned out to be far from what the guy thought. Adrien continued to punch the short-haired bully. Another gang member decided that he would be the second to attack Adrien, and so the red-haired boy was already preparing, pouring his own mana into his knife. But before he could even take a step towards Adrien, he was already hit in the face with the blunt side of the sword. The bully flew into the air, flying to the side. And now the third person is trying to harm Adrien, attacking from behind. It seemed that this daredevil had succeeded, unlike the others, and he struck. But it turned out that Adrien easily dodged, and the blow was simply delivered to the ground. Laughing at what had happened, Adrien was already swinging his sword to strike the guy in the face. Adrien hit the daredevil right in the forehead with great force. This blow caused the guy to also rise into the air and fly a decent distance. Then Eric became seriously tense, not understanding why the second-year students were losing to one first-year student, and he also didn't understand what kind of strange sword technique Adrien was using. At this moment, Adrien was already waiting for the next attacker, waving his sword. But all the gang members lost their fighting spirit. Then Adrien pointed his sword towards the gang and reminded them that he would smash the heads of those who stood like pillars. Eric, realizing that his gang members were seriously doubting their abilities, shouted that there was nothing to be afraid of because he was an ordinary freshman. This amused Adrien a little. He said that the gang leader even had a little courage. Eric didn't like this. He swung his weapon and told the freshman to shut up. At that moment, Adrien had already put his sheathed sword to Eric's stomach. It happened lightning fast. The guy put his palm to the butt of his weapon, mockingly told his opponent not to stand still, and sharply pressed on the sword, using mana. A strong wave of mana hit Eric's body, and he, just like his friends before, was thrown to the side. He thought that he didn't understand how Adrien had managed to get so close to him so quickly. Falling from the blow, Eric instantly lost consciousness. He woke up when Adrien hit him on the cheek, calling him a miserable brat. Adrien immediately started asking about who they were and why they had gathered and decided to fight him. Eric, calling Adrien hard of hearing, aggressively repeated that they were his senior sophomores. Adrien asked if a bunch of second years with guns attacking a freshman was normal for their gang. Adrien also demanded to know who sent them, but Eric, hesitating, replied that they simply wanted to wipe the nose of the best first-year student at the Valhalla qualifiers. Adrien mockingly said that he was going to cry, noting that it sounded ridiculous and like a gangster tribute. After that, he took the bag, started to leave, and told Eric to clean everything up. Eric, starting to lift the body of the earth, said that Adrien would not be able to attend school normally now, since he would be expelled as soon as they found out about this incident. Adrien replied absolutely calmly that he didn't care, because people would only find out about it if Eric himself told them. He added that Eric's gang's reputation would suffer if everyone knew that a crowd of seniors came to beat up a freshman, and he took them out, an argument that made Eric very angry. Adrien added that Eric should think carefully before telling anything if he wants to continue going to school and join the guild. After this, the guy calmly left, leaving all the gang members lying on the asphalt. And so the morning of the next day arrived. Bob Ventrick waited impatiently for a call from Eric, hoping for good news. Finally, the sophomore called. Bob greeted him as an older man, showing mock respect, and asked if they had beaten Adrien well, to which Eric said that he was turning down the job. This shocked Bob, as he had not expected this at all. Bob, no longer trying to seem respectful, asked again what Eric had told him. The second-year student said to stay away from anything related to Adrien. Eric was about to hang up, but Bob told him to wait and began to suggest an alternative plan. He said that if Adrien beat up his gang, then you can simply report it to the administration, and if there are still visible wounds, then this will be evidence. Bob also added that in this case he would also pay the entire promised amount and try to get the Ventrick family to finance Eric. Eric himself already knew the answer to this proposal. He replied that they would not do that because his gang would never be able to restore their honor after that, after which he hung up. Ventrick again did not expect a negative answer to such a proposal. His face expressed anger and incomprehension. In a fit of rage, he threw his phone on the floor, causing the gadget to shatter into pieces. Bob, with his head in his hands, called Alice, asking if she had contacted Larry. The girl replied that she had conveyed everything, but since he was far away, it would take him time to get to them, which made Bob even more angry. At this time, Larry was in Mexico at the Oripia Academy. He, blue on a pile of students he had defeated after another fight, learned that Bob wanted Larry to fly to Korea. He learned that Bob needed him to deal with a man named Adrien, and for this he would receive a reward that had already been prepared. Larry's scarred face twisted into a mentally ill expression. He really liked the offer. Fast forward to 6 o'clock the next morning, straight to the gym. Adrien had just arrived and was ready to start training. But he got scared when he heard Barchie's voice. For a second he was stupefied because he didn't understand what was happening. Barchie said that he was in a sealed sword and did not understand why Adrien was so surprised. Adrien said he was afraid that Barchie had somehow managed to get out, because then he would have to beat him again and put him back. The guy started stretching before training, and at the same time asked Barchie if everything was okay with the sword. He was worried that the sword was an artifact kept in Valhalla, and they left the constellation room, taking it with them. Barchie said there was no need to worry because he left a line there, but Adrien said that was exactly what he was afraid of. Adrien asked where Barchie learned to create replicas, to which he replied that it happened when he woke up and lost all his power, but from the very beginning he could create replicas. Engrossed in conversation with Barchie and continuing his warm-up, Adrien didn't notice Roxy entering the room. Opening his eyes, he saw a girl in front of him who was already ready for training. The guy greeted the girl and was glad that she came after all. Roxy asked again if he would teach her how to wield a sword now that she was here. Adrien said no, adding that they would start by pumping up her stamina. The girl asked why, and the guy replied that she could leave if she didn't want to. Roxy immediately said that she would do everything. Then Adrien smiled and told her to start stretching. The girl began to do exercises, and Adrien thought about the strangeness of modern training methods. He thought it was wrong that everyone paid so much attention to mana, but didn't pay attention to stamina. Even Roxy, who had a huge amount of mana, had extremely low stamina. While Adrien was thinking, Roxy had already finished stretching. Then they began a full-fledged workout, starting with push-ups, which were difficult for the girl. Then there were squats. Roxy did regular ones, and Adrien did squats with dumbbells, since his physical strength was already on a completely different level. Next comes an exercise for the arm muscles using dumbbells. After all this, the girl lay down on the floor trying to catch her breath, and thinking that this was the end of the workout. But Adrien had other plans. He said they were just getting started. The girl, thinking it was a joke, asked again what the guy said. Adrien said that they still had 20 kilometers to run. The girl couldn't believe her ears, but agreed, although she had practically no strength left. Now it was time for school. Before the lesson, Adrien thought about how, even though this time the training was more difficult, Roxy still managed, which meant that her powers were worthy of development. At this moment, the girl sat motionless at her desk. She was completely exhausted at the very beginning of the day. And so the lecture began. A high-class instructor and teacher of the topic of spatial monsters, Lilia, entered the class, who immediately ordered everyone to be silent. She said that today they would have a simple written test, which she warned about. All the students listened to her attentively. Everyone started to do it. Adrien finished faster than anyone else. Lilia announced that time was up and that the tests needed to be passed forward, starting from the back desks. She said that today's test will not affect the students' grades, but will be used to assess their knowledge. After that, she said goodbye to everyone and left the office. At this point, Barie contacted Adrien, asking if the guy was sure he could write such answers. Adrien thought it was awkward that Barie was watching him do the test. Only then did the god of destruction explain to the boy that he could read his thoughts regarding himself. Having understood the situation, Adrien said that he only answered as he knew. At this point, Lilia had already started checking the work in the teacher's room, and it seemed like all the work had been done well. But one work really angered her. She couldn't understand whether they could really be considered answers at all. Teacher Chris, who had just made coffee and was about to take a break, passed by. He saw that Lily was very unhappy about something and felt angry. The teacher asked if she was currently checking his class's tests, to which she replied yes. She said that she had assigned the students to learn how to properly kill monsters in order to prepare for the combat simulation in the next class. Lilia added that the class was quite strong. There are children from 3 main families in the class and everyone did quite well. Chris said that since everything was great, he would go further, and Lilia gave her approval. As soon as he moved away and was about to take a sip, he heard a sharp cry behind him, which made him splash the drink. He turned around and saw that Lilia was screaming. She was screaming that she didn't understand how the student dared to call these the correct answers. Lilia added that it was Adrien, and that not only did he not try hard at his work, he was actually making fun of the class. She wasn't going to ignore it. She said that at the next lesson she would show him his work and explain that monsters can't be killed so easily. 1 week passed. A lesson began in the battle simulation room, which was conducted by teacher Lilia. She told the whole class that she had brought their past tests and that most of the results were very good. But there was one flaw. After these words, she told Adrien to come to her. He obediently followed her order, while Lily herself watched him closely with a displeased face. She thrust the test forward with a sharp movement of her hand and told him to take it, adding that having 0 points on such an easy level test was unacceptable. The guy objected, saying that he took the job very seriously. The first task was to name the most effective way to deal with the stone goblin. The guy wrote that his stomach needed to be cut open, and Lilia started to get irritated after that. To the second question about what a person would do if he saw 8 jungle goblins coming towards him, Adrien replied that he would start with the closest one, and the flood would pierce each one in turn. The teacher could not believe the seriousness and effectiveness of such methods. She asked again whether the guy really thought he could win with such methods. Adrien said that of course he could. Lily got angry. It seemed to her that the guy was just talking nonsense. Then she calmly said that since he was confident in his abilities, she would give him the opportunity to prove his methods, and press the button. The space around the students began to change again. Adrien wasn't as scared as he was the first time. He saw that there was a monster behind the barrier. The teacher said that if the boy killed the monsters the same way he wrote in the text, she would correct his grade. The guy, without thinking, put the test on the table and went to take the necessary weapon. Taking the necessary sword, he went towards the enemy. Lily was sure that, although he was able to defeat 120 goblins on his own, he would not be able to defeat a stone goblin with 1 blow. The guy was already standing in front of the enemy in the meantime. The goblin decided to attack first. Grinning, Adrien swung his sword at the stone goblin. With a sharp movement of his hand, he pierced his opponent's stomach through and through. Instantly, the monster's simulation began to disappear, indicating the guy's victory. And then the monster completely dissolved. The sword fell to the ground with a crash. The teacher, not expecting such an outcome at all, could not say a word. Olivia, who, like all the students, was watching the fight, was taken aback. She could not understand how he killed the stone goblin with an ordinary sword. Jon didn't understand what just happened either. Only Roxy at this moment once again admired Adrien's strength. Finding the strength within herself, Lilia finally asked how he was able to do this. The guy, not understanding why such a stupid question was asked, simply replied that he had just hit him in the stomach with a sword. Lilia understood that in order to defeat such a monster with a sword, one must have at least a Class A contract. and in a normal situation, it would be logical to deal with this monster with a blunt weapon. The guy asked mockingly if his answer was ultimately correct. The teacher said it would depend on the second task and quickly pressed the next button. The environment changed its shape again. Adrien found himself right in front of the entrance to the tunnel, on the walls of which lit torches were burning. Lily, when the guy turned his head away from the entrance, told the guy to be more attentive and look back. 3 jungle goblins began to emerge from the tunnel. The difference between these goblins and the normal ones was that they had problems with aggression. And if you do something wrong, the goblin will use the roar skill so that the rest of the goblins in the area will come running to help. She thought that usually a mage would either try to kill everyone at once or run away. There were only 3 goblins in front of the boy at the moment, but he didn't know that there were 5 more that would attack him immediately if the boy made a mistake. And so Adrien, throwing the sword from one hand to the other, headed towards the enemies. She attacked the monsters furiously, putting all her strength into the blow. He landed his first blow right on the forehead of one of the goblins. Lightning fast, he launched his next blow straight into the throat of the second goblin. And so, after a couple of blows, all the monsters were defeated. Lily, seeing this, could not believe her eyes. The guy turned around and said that he had completed the second task as well, smiling. The next day came and Adrien and Roxy were already in the training room. They were running on a treadmill. The guy was doing well as usual, but the girl was already feeling a loss of strength. When she had run the required distance, she fell to the floor in a star pose and tried to catch her breath. Adrien asked why she had such a hard time with these exercises, since she should have trained in her clan before. The girl replied that she usually doesn't push herself like that. The guy asked how she was going to fight monsters if she didn't train like this. Roxy said she could use magical power by borrowing it from the constellation. Adrien expected such an answer, since such people rely on constellations and train magic, not endurance. He wondered what such a person would do if he ran out of mana during a fight, or the constellation simply didn't give him magic. He then asked if Roxy thought these exercises were useless. Roxy replied that she would do them, since the guy promised that he would teach her fencing. To this, the guy asked the next question, wondering if the girl was doing this just because he said so. He quickly realized that he had asked the wrong thing and told the girl to forget about it, adding that classes would start soon, so the training was over. The guy himself was in no hurry to leave, so Roxy asked why he wasn't leaving. Adrien replied that he would do one more approach and asked if the girl wanted to continue too. A second later, he said that it was better for her to go to school, and the girl did not object, left the hall, saying goodbye to the guy. So, when he was putting the discs on the barbell, Barie contacted him and asked if the girl's name was Roxy, to which the guy replied yes. The guy said that he agreed to train with her only because she was pestering him with her questions. Barie asked if Adrien had ever shown her his sword technique, to which the boy said no, but she had seen it during a fight in class. Barie was surprised that she was able to see the power of this technique just by seeing it once. Adrien said that he found it interesting too. At that moment, the guy heard that he was not alone in the hall and turned his head. Jon was lying next to him, lifting a barbell. He was just finishing his training and also noticed Adrien. Adrien asked how long Jon had been in the hall. He replied that he always trains here and has been here since the morning. After these words, he went to the exit. Adrien noted that due to his predisposition, Jon could train for very long periods of time, which meant that his endurance was good. He told Barie that this guy's approach to training was more sensible than others. The guy asked the god of destruction what these constellations do anyway. Barie said that although he is also a constellation, because he was imprisoned for 300 years, he knows nothing about others like him. He added that the guy could learn more about this if he completed the system's task. A new task had already appeared in the system, which said that now you need to visit the Eye of the Great Forest of Valhalla, the home of Rona. But be sure to take the Heavenly Sword. He knew this was the survival site they would visit at the end of the first semester. The guy thought that if it weren't for these tasks, he would have gotten out of here as soon as he took his things. Adrien decided that he could not leave this place until he completed this task. Let's move to the United Kingdom in London to the Bentrick family mansion. On the walls of the entire mansion hung paintings depicting their relic mask and the masks themselves. At the head of the long table sat the owner of the house, Kayla Ventri, and at the other end stood a servant. He reported to the chief that the labyrinth on the border had been taken care of. To this, the woman replied that this was very good work and asked if there was anything else to report. He said he wanted to hire a few competent people he had recently found, one of whom was the only survivor of the Robert clan. He then added that he had found another one. Both of them were A-rank contractors. Kayla approved the decision and said that after testing their abilities, they should be sent to her. The servant hesitated, not knowing whether to talk about another situation. But in the end, he made up his mind and said that he had something to tell about Bob Ventrick. He said Bob called Larry to South Korea. Kayla was very angry when she heard this news. Larry Ventrick was a very troubled child and a serious criminal. He committed numerous crimes using his family's name. At 19, he killed 5 people at an English academy over a simple argument. And at 20, he was already kicked out of his family. Kayla ordered the servant to follow Larry on Bob's behalf, to which the servant meekly agreed. She also said to warn Bob that if he was caught doing anything strange, he would be kicked out of the family just like Larry. The servant said that he understood everything and that was the end of the report, after which he left. Kayla thought that their family's strength wasn't meant for trash like these guys. Praising herself, she was sure that all this power was intended only for her. Looking at the picture of the constellation, she asked if she was thinking correctly. Let's move back to Valhalla, where all the students were already sitting in the lecture. The teacher explained that monsters often act alone, but sometimes they can team up. Adrien was bored listening to the teacher, since he already knew this information, and he was lost in his thoughts. He thought about the benefits of his training, as he felt that he had clearly become stronger. The guy didn't understand why this body was in such bad condition before training. He recalled that when he practiced chi circulation on the first day, he was barely able to finish because he had less mana than an ordinary person. And the physical condition of his body was so bad that he almost lost consciousness from a short period of working with a shovel. He wondered if something might have happened to this body in the past. The guy leaned back in his chair and decided not to focus on this for long. His thoughts were interrupted by a hand reaching towards his desk. Adrien immediately noticed her. It was Olivia, placing a folded piece of paper on Adrien's desk, looking him in the eye. The guy immediately took the note in his hands and began to unfold it. There was nothing on the piece of paper except the word "hey." And so the classes finally ended. Chris announced some important information at the end. He said that this weekend the students would be able to leave the academy if they filled out an application. And with that, he ended the lesson. After the lecture, Adrien immediately went to the teacher's room with a statement. He was made to stop by a voice behind him that simply said, "Hey." Adrien turned around and saw Olivia approaching him. He said one single word, "What?" In that note, to the written word "hey," he responded with the same word "what," and the girl then ignored him. He asked the girl to speak faster as he was busy and in a hurry to submit the application. Olivia hesitated and couldn't put words together, just muttering something under her breath. The guy rudely told her to be faster and called her crazy. Olivia couldn't stand it and got angry at Adrien, asking why he called her that. Adrien said it was because it wasn't normal to piss someone off the way she did. He asked again what she wanted from him, but the girl hesitated again. She remembered that when she watched him fight, he killed a stone goblin with one blow of his sword. Although such a method is not in the books, Olivia wanted to ask how he was able to kill him. As soon as she started speaking, teacher Lilia suddenly appeared between them and sharply asked the same question that Olivia wanted to ask. Adrien was surprised at how quickly she appeared here. He said that it was very unexpected, since he thought that she hated him. But Lilia denied this, saying that she didn't care what happened then. She said that she thought there was only one way to kill a monster. But Adrien showed her otherwise. She asked if the guy wanted to be her assistant. Adrien said he refused and went towards the teacher's room. Lilia continued to beg him and followed him. They left, leaving Olivia alone. The girl decided that she didn't really need it and didn't follow them. And so the next day came. Adrien went to the place he planned to visit. This place was Aranak. The previous evening, he had been looking for information about this place. He had to find a trading forum where he could sell the jewelry he found from the vault. At the moment when he found what he needed, Roxy wrote to him, saying that she would not be able to come to training tomorrow. Adrien wrote that he would also be busy tomorrow. Roxy started sending a huge amount of stickers. The guy didn't know how to stop her, but he resigned himself and just continued to study the information, which said that he needed to follow the link and get a reservation and location. And now he is already going to that very place. He was looking for some old cafe. When he found it, he noticed that the cafe was really very old, that even the letter on the sign had practically fallen off. He went inside. Everything around was broken. Furniture was scattered. There were cobwebs all around. Adrien, reading the place indicated in the message, moved towards the right corner. There he saw a door and went towards it. And so he came out, leaving this abandoned cafe. He knew that this was his first time here, but he felt a strange feeling, as if he had been here before. Especially the purple sky and the cloudy moon seemed most familiar to him, similar to those he had seen 300 years ago. As he walked further, he heard a voice from behind him asking if this was his first time here. It was a tall man in a leather suit. Adrien realized that this was the worker mentioned in the letter. The man asked if this was the guy's first time here and if he knew how the market worked. Having shown the money, he replied that he had an idea. He then handed the stack of money to the man, who dutifully took it. He spent a large amount of money on this, and he only had 30,000 won left. The man said that Adrien could ask him questions if he wanted, to which the guy said that he wanted to ask the worker one thing. He asked where he needed to go to sell the jewelry. The worker asked if the guy was looking for an auction, and Adrien replied that he just wanted to sell it quickly. The man said that in that case, he needed to go to the third quarter, because there were many merchants there who would buy anything from him, from weapons to jewelry and much more. Adrien asked to be told which of the merchants was the most reliable. The worker recommended a merchant named Morris, as he was famous for his best prices and specialized in jewelry. Adrien asked where exactly the third block was, and the man pointed and told him to go straight ahead and not turn at the fork. The guy thanked him and was about to leave, but the man added one more thing. He handed the guy a black mask with ear flaps and said that he strongly recommended walking around the market wearing it. Considering the products sold in the market, almost everyone prefers to wear masks. The guy thanked the man again and turned around to leave. The worker bowed after the guy and wished him a good time. Here the guy arrived at the third quarter of the market. Everyone around was really wearing the same masks. He noticed a merchant who was examining a diamond with the help of a special device. The boy approached him and said that the merchant must have been Morris, to which he gave him a positive answer. Adrien said he had a few items he would like to sell right now. Morris said it would depend on the specific item, but if it was gold or jewelry, there would be no problem. At this point, Adrien had already put his hand in his backpack to find his goods, and then he took out a small black bag with strings from his backpack. He threw it on the table in front of the merchant, saying that he wanted to sell all the jewelry in this bag. Morris slowly opened the bag and, seeing the contents, asked if these were rings. The merchant took one of the rings and began to examine it carefully, turning it in his hand. He did this with the same device with which he examined the diamond. Morris was shocked by what he realized and exclaimed that he could not believe his eyes. In his hands was a real magnificent ring of the era of destruction. At this moment, the merchant was only thinking about whether the rest of the jewels were so valuable. He looked again into the bag that contained all the other decorations. Then he was simply speechless. All the jewels were from the same era. Adrien distracted him from his delight. The guy asked how much the merchant was willing to pay for all this. After these words, the merchant began to carefully examine the jewelry again. He couldn't understand where the guy got such artifacts from, because judging by his voice, he was only about 20 years old. Without thinking twice, Morris asked where the guy got these jewels from. Adrien said he had heard that it was not customary to ask such questions in this market. Morris seemed to be brought out of his trance by these words, and he replied that the guy was right and apologized to him. Immediately after this, the merchant thought that he had almost lost his reputation. Despite the significance of the jewelry and its quantity, Morris did not deceive the guy and said that he did not have enough money to buy all this and handed the bag back to the guy's hands. Adrien asked where he could get money for them then. The man pointed down the street, saying that the auction room was there. The boy asked the merchant how long it would take to sell all the tools. Morris said the time will be about 2 or 3, as many people book slots in advance, so it will be some time before the auction hill opens. Adrien asked if he would have to come in person to collect the money. After thinking about it, the guy asked how much the merchant would buy them from him for. Morris thought seriously and started counting. He quickly wrote down some number on his phone and showed it to Adrien. The guy was shocked that the price for it was so high, and the merchant was willing to provide it. Adrien continued asking questions and learned that the merchant was willing to pay 3/4 of the principal amount, which was also a huge figure. The man added that these were just his rough calculations, and if the guy went to the auction, things would go completely differently. Adrien was happy with the amount and told Morris that he agreed. Morris couldn't believe what he had just heard and asked the guy again. After all, these decorations were very expensive in their time, but now they have become even more expensive. The reason for the constant price increase was the constellations. The constellations that began to appear after this era reacted strangely to artifacts from it. Thanks to this, a commoner was able to make a contract with an S-class constellation. Morris thought that guy was still a contracted soldier. Morris thought about this as he looked at the ring again more closely, and noticed how incredibly powerful magic enveloped the jewel. He realized that the magic of that time still existed, and he also reflected on how incredibly lucky he was to have bought such meaningful things for such a small amount of money. The merchant decided that today was clearly his lucky day, but his thoughts were interrupted by a silhouette that created a shadow that blocked Morris's light. The merchant was shocked that the silhouette that appeared in front of him out of nowhere turned out to be the Black Cat, and also the owner of the market. At this time, Adrien had already stepped over the threshold of the abandoned cafe through which he had entered the market before. He took off his mask, thinking about how awkward it was. The guy looked around a little to see if he had really come through this cafe, and he realized that this was it. Then he took out his phone again and looked at his bank account, which had recently been replenished with a large sum of money, which made the guy very happy. He knew that if this money ran out, there were still many different treasures in the vault. When the guy was leaving the cafe, his phone suddenly rang. The number was unfamiliar to the guy. Adrien picked up the phone and immediately asked who was on the other side of the call. The stranger turned out to be a very familiar Lily, who joyfully greeted the guy. The guy logically asked where she got his phone number. She said she was an instructor and had information, but it didn't matter because she wanted to invite the guy for a bite to eat, setting up a meeting place near the gym. She added that she would pay for everything herself and abruptly hung up, not leaving the guy a second to answer, but he decided to go there for the free food. At this time, the conversation between the black cat and Morris continued in the market. The merchant asked why the owner himself was at the market, to which the man calmly said that their relationship was not so bad that he could not come. Morris said that although they had met a couple of times, a simple trader could not chat casually with a market owner. The owner was called the Black Cat because of his black mask on his face, which completely depicted the grace of a cat. The important man replied that it was precisely because of this attitude of Morris towards him that he liked him. Morris ignored the cat's phrase and again tried to find out why he came to the market. The Black Cat, leaning sharply against the table, said that it was nothing serious. It was just that the merchant had submitted an anonymous bid for the auction for the first time in a long time. To which Morris, clearly expressing displeasure, said that apparently the anonymous application was not so anonymous. The man responded that the real owner of the market is not him, but his constellation, so he can receive any information. After this, he languidly extended his hand towards the merchant and asked him to show him what he had put up for auction. Morris immediately agreed, but thought it was strange that the Black Cat was the first to show interest in artifacts, even if they were from the era of destruction. The merchant very quickly took out a bag of jewels and placed it on the table in front of the market owner. The Black Cat immediately opened the bag, took out part of its contents, and began to examine everything. The man said that the item would sell for quite a large sum of money, but Morris still didn't understand what the owner was getting at. Suddenly, a system message appeared in front of the owner, saying that the constellation on the other side wanted the ring. Then, identical messages started coming in huge quantities. The Black Cat realized that his constellation incredibly wanted to get this artifact. Let's move on to the restaurant in Valhalla, where Adrien and Lilia were eating at the same table. Lily had already started her meal, and Adrien hadn't touched his food yet, and the instructor noticed this. She decided to ask the guy why he wasn't eating his order, and the guy replied that he was just wondering why there was such a place as this restaurant in Valhalla. Lily, happily trying to explain, said that in addition to the usual school cafeteria and the restaurant for the staff, there was also a regular restaurant. She was surprised that the guy did not know about it. After this, Adrien finally started eating, replying that he simply wasn't particularly interested. And so he finally decided to find out why Lilia had invited him here. After this, the woman jumped up from her seat and exclaimed a request for the student to become her assistant. Adrien said quite calmly that he simply didn't want to. But Lilia wasn't going to give in and said that if he agreed, he would receive many benefits. She said that the guy, when he went to the meeting, clearly knew what the instructor would ask, so he was obliged to listen to her. To this, the guy decided to ask what benefits he would receive for this. Then hope and sincere joy sparkled in Lilia's eyes. The first thing the guy would get is a scholarship and a lot of grants. The second is a chance to write a dissertation with Lilia, and if he publishes it, he will be able to write about the 3 types of monster attacks, after which the guy's name will be listed in the World Association for Monster Research. Lily told the guy about this with incredible and sincere delight, and the guy at that time did not show any emotion and just ate. He would also be able to leave the academy not once a month, but twice a week. After announcing all the privileges, she asked the guy the same question again. Adrien replied that it all sounded like just an inflated ego, and he still didn't want to be her assistant. He thought that if the benefits were better, he might agree. But for now, his main goal would remain to reach the eye of the great forest. These words upset Lilia very much. She did not know how to persuade him now and what else she could offer. Then she had an idea and proposed a simple exchange of information to Adrien. She wanted the guy to tell her about monster attacks, and in return she would tell him about what interests him. Adrien asked what information exactly they were talking about. Lilia immediately began talking about Roxy, who now often spends time in Adrien's company. Adrien said he wasn't interested and wondered if he was just helping her with her training. Were they really that close? But Lilia was not stopped by his words. She continued her story, saying that she heard that Roxy's family might soon abandon her. After Lilia ignored Adrien's words about not being interested in the topic, Adrien stood up from his seat and said he was leaving. The instructor tried to stop him, but the guy repeated that he didn't need all these benefits and information. Lily jumped up from her seat, saying that the guy should tell her at least something in exchange for this information. But Adrien said he honestly didn't care. Suddenly, the guy decided to ask another question. Why was such an infantile woman conducting the classes so harshly? She said it would be problematic if the instructor teaching about monsters taught the lessons differently. This is done because the survival of students in a real battle directly depends on these classes. Lily believes that this is the true duty of an instructor. After that, the guy simply wished Lilia good luck and headed towards the exit. The instructor tried to stop him and try to get him to tell her something in return, but the guy again said that he didn't want to do it. Let's move on to the Chojin family estate. Roxy and her older brother were already sitting in front of their father, waiting for what he would say. The father said he had gathered them here to find out their intentions before participating in the sorting test. Roxy's brother, Drake, was already a member of the True History Guild and was the leader of the attack. After passing the test, the winner will get a chance to make a contract through the sacred relic. This test will show who in the family is worthy of becoming the legal representative of the family. But then the head added that the loser would be kicked out of the family. Then he asked if his children agreed to participate when they had already learned the conditions. Drake immediately exclaimed the word yes, and Roxy said she would do it too. Father and brother looked sharply at Roxy. They didn't want to hear such an answer. The atmosphere around was tense. After that, the father simply added that the sorting test would take place in 3 weeks, and everyone could leave. As soon as Roxy and Drake left the room, the guy asked unkindly if Roxy hadn't gotten the hint. The girl asked again, and the guy repeated, "Didn't she notice her father's reaction when he heard her agreement to participate?" Roxy was embarrassed as she noticed and understood everything perfectly well. Drake then asked mockingly if a girl who was an illegitimate child really expected to become the head of the family. Roxy gritted her teeth. She was very angry at the rude man's words. With the same mockery, the guy added that the girl had a very scary grimace. A crazy smile appeared on the guy's face. He said that since the girl could not even receive the blessing of the constellation, then she should not even hope to win the sorting test. After which he left, saying in parting that he would make Roxy pay dearly and let her continue to spend her parents' money. As he almost closed the door behind him, sticking his eye out through the crack, he said threateningly that they would meet in 3 weeks. Roxy was left alone with her thoughts, but it was clear that she was serious. Her incentive was her mother's last wish before her death. Her mother, holding her daughter's hand for the last time, told her that she was to become the head of the Chojin family, and after achieving that goal, she would be able to do anything she wanted. Remembering this, Roxy was filled with energy and understood what her true goal was. And then the next day came. All the students were already sitting at their desks and listening to the teacher. Just as Adrien was deep in his thoughts, Barie contacted him and said that midterm exams were coming up soon. Barie said that if Adrien sits quietly, the constellation can also hear everything. Then he reminded again that the teacher talks about upcoming exams, but Adrien is almost always not very attentive in class. After that, Adrien decided to listen to Chris's speech. He said that the exams in Valhalla are extremely important. He said that at the end of the semester, students with the lowest scores would be expelled. Chris finished his speech by saying that there was no need to drop out of the race at the very beginning, and then Adrien thought about it. Adrien had no problems with the practical part of the exam, but he was worried about the theory. He couldn't leave school until he got into the eye of the Great Forest. Then he had an idea and turned to Barie, asking if he had listened to all the classes. He answered yes, after which Adrien said that Barie would decide the test for him. Adrien said he would just check Barchie's answers and tell him if anything was wrong. Barie was outraged and said that it would not be fair since it was an exam. Then the guy angrily answered the constellation that it would be Barie who would tell him the answers and that would be all. And then Chris said that the class was over and everyone could leave. Adrien immediately stood up and started to take his bag to leave quickly, but then someone distracted him, calling him by name behind his back. Turning around, he saw that it was Roxy. She asked if there would be training today. The guy answered positively and said that such questions make him think that the girl wants to end it. Roxy said that wasn't the case at all, so the guy asked, "What was it then?" Then, without waiting for an answer to the previous question, he asked if she wanted to learn how to use a sword. But the girl was confused by this question. Adrien assumed that since the girl was training with him, she probably didn't use a sword at all, and the girl confirmed his assumption. After that, he said that he would teach her how to hold a sword properly, even though it was not martial arts. He knew he needed to train with his sword himself. The guy then told Roxy to come to the training room near the gym. Roxy beamed with joy after these words and agreed. And so they were both there and starting training. Adrien asked when the girl last used her sword. Roxy said she hadn't touched him since they started training. The guy suggested that Roxy had been training every day before this, and the girl confirmed this again. Then the boy told the girl to draw her blade. Roxy did it without thinking. Adrien began to tell Roxy to put strength into her index finger and pinky and grip the handle firmly. The girl immediately began to try to follow the instructions. Once she did this, she noticed a significant difference between this way of holding the blade and the usual way. She didn't even put magic into the sword, but she already felt that it was safer and more stable to hold it this way than with both hands. After that, the guy ordered her to attack him using everything she had. The girl obediently agreed. She instantly got into an attack pose, and the guy didn't even move. Roxy started using mana and warned the guy that she was about to start. She quickly ran towards Adrien and immediately noticed a change in the speed of her legs. The girl quickly tried to strike the guy, but he deftly blocked it with his sword. He then said with a smirk on his face that the girl had clearly become faster. Pushing her away, he advised her not to put more magic into the feat than necessary. The girl stood up again and said she understood. She moved decisively towards the guy again. She swung her sword and struck, cutting through the air in front of her. But Adrien was able to easily dodge it, telling the girl that her move was very good. He then gave his opponent a sharp blow to her sword, causing her to lose her balance, and said that she needed to turn her body a little more when she stopped. Grinning and stretching his shoulder, the guy again said that there was no time to rest and ordered to attack. She struck him with her sword again, but Adrien easily blocked her attack with his blade. The girl tried again, striking the blade with all her might from top to bottom. But Adrien easily dodged again. The girl's sword hit the floor, leaving a deep crack in the tile. Roxy continued her attempts, thinking that she had become much stronger thanks to her training with Adrien. The training continued, Adrien was happy, and Roxy was really determined. They had been working long and hard enough that the floor around Roxy was already covered in cracks. The girl was very tired and stopped, out of breath. And Adrien wasn't tired at all. He only said that he had already been training for an hour. After these words, Roxy collapsed on the floor and began to think about how her skills had seriously improved since she entered. But looking at Adrien, who was still full of strength, she understood that she was still very far from him. At this time, the guy put away his weapon and began to warm up after training. The girl stood up resolutely and asked if Adrien would be able to spar with her again. Adrien said he didn't know yet. He thought about how sparring with her was actually useful, and that she was fun to teach since she had talent. The guy felt that she was familiar with sword art back at the ceremony, as she used a similar technique. Looking at her, he realized that if they had lived 300 years ago, she would definitely have been worthy of being his student. Noticing that the guy was thinking for a long time, Roxy repeated her question about sparring. Adrien smirked and decided to joke by saying that he didn't want to. Roxy hesitated, but replied that she understood him, to which Adrien asked why she gave in so quickly. The girl answered without hesitation that she would do whatever Adrien said. She knew that if she followed his advice, she would definitely become stronger. The guy didn't expect such an answer and said that then the training was over for today. And so 2 weeks passed, the day of the exam arrived. All the students had already gathered at the stadium. Olivia recalled that the last time she was in this place was during the ceremony. Jon wondered if all the students around him were first years. He had no idea that there were actually so many of them. And Adrien didn't understand at all why they were gathered here. Then Barie contacted him and said that his class teacher had spoken about this about 2 weeks ago. Adrien still couldn't understand anything. When suddenly the teachers appeared, Adam said that he would now tell about the midterm exams of Valhalla. He announced that this year the practical part of the exam is clearing a dungeon. The space around the students began to change dramatically, and Adam continued to speak. He said that the students would split into teams and go to an artificial dungeon. The instructor added that students can divide themselves into teams, adding that there should be about 8 people in a team, but everyone has the right to decide whether to make the team larger or smaller. Teachers will only evaluate the students' contribution to clearing the dungeon and the criteria for disqualification, all given 5 hours. Adam then said that whoever fails to complete the test within the allotted time will be considered as having failed the exam. After his speech, he suddenly shouted that the exam was starting. The teachers watched closely as the students divided into teams. Chris told Adam that, as expected, the students panicked. At this time, Olivia was already gathering her team. She was calling people, since there weren't enough of them in her team. She understood that she shouldn't choose someone who is better than her, because 5 hours is quite enough for a dungeon of this level, and the main thing is to prove yourself when passing the dungeon. And so she found the required number of people and said that it was time for them to start the passage. Adam expected that the students from the 5 major families would quickly understand the principle of this exam. And that is what happened. But students from ordinary families go in a team of 20 people, but still, most often in a group of 8 students. They also had conflicts, as the team could become unbalanced. After finishing his thoughts, Adam told Chris that they needed to get ready to evaluate the students, since in about 30 minutes, everyone would be entering the dungeon. At this time, Adrien noticed how the teachers immediately began to write something in their notebooks as soon as someone entered the dungeon, and he realized that they began to evaluate immediately. Turning back, the guy saw Roxy, who was standing alone and probably not included in any of the teams. Adrien decided to approach her. He asked if she had joined any team, to which the girl answered no. Then the guy said that almost everyone had already entered the dungeon. What was the girl going to do? She replied that she would do whatever Adrien told her. These words stunned the guy. He clearly didn't expect to hear that. The guy laughed in his thoughts at the fact that after their last training, the girl followed his words like a sword. He then told her that he would go to the test alone, after which he turned around and began to walk away. Roxy asked if she should go alone too, or join one of the teams, to which the guy replied that she should do as she wants. But he thought the exam wouldn't be difficult. He headed towards the entrance to the dungeon, and the girl began to think about what she should do. And then one guy who was already on one of the teams noticed her. He approached her and asked if she was the same Roxy. The girl had already made her decision at that moment. The guy said that if she hadn't found a team yet, she could join them, and all his teammates smiled amiably after these words. But Roxy simply apologized to this proposal and resolutely said that she would go alone. She then walked towards the entrance to the dungeon and began to open the door, but the guy tried to stop her, saying that she could be disqualified if she couldn't, to which Roxy replied that she could handle it, especially since Adrien said it wouldn't be difficult. The guy was afraid for the girl and once again tried to reason with her, shouting for her to stop and not do this. But Roxy was determined and simply closed the door, ignoring the guy's words. In the observation room, all the teachers were keeping a close eye on all the students. Some groups had already encountered monsters, and attention was paid to those even more. Students were assessed quickly. Most of them did not receive more than 3 points. Chris watched as Adam quickly assessed the students. He knew that the instructor always assessed everyone quickly and without mistakes. When Adam was still a soldier, he was called a clean master, as he is a legendary contractor with a 99% dungeon clearance rate. Chris respected teacher Adam because he understands the basics of clearing better than anyone else, and that is how he evaluates students. Adam, meanwhile, watching the students, thought that this year was quite good. He noted that members of 5 families stood out in particular, but among them, the most outstanding is Olivia. She was able to skillfully coordinate the actions of her team, assessing everyone's abilities with great accuracy and issuing commands. There was a moment when their team was attacked by a large orc, but thanks to Olivia's command that the sword-wielding students should take action, they easily blocked the attack. Olivia also did a great job of maintaining team spirit, encouraging everyone. She gave commands to the archers at the right moment. Thanks to this, they were able to stop the monster a little. At that moment, Olivia herself struck the orc, jumping out of the crowd. This plan helped this team pass the test and destroy the monsters with ease. Adam admired the way she gave commands and acted with precision and skill. He understood that despite the fact that she spent most of her time giving commands, she herself participated in such a way as to get points. Adam thought that if Olivia was already showing such results in midterm exams, then reaching the top was just a matter of time for her. He remembered the qualifying tests and thought that if Adrien hadn't won back then, Olivia's reputation would have been untarnished. At that moment, he wanted to watch the guy too. He went into search and entered his name. But the program showed that this student was not found. Adam knew that this could not be, since the system was working properly. And at that moment, a shocking thought came to him, the truth of which he did not want to believe. He decided to check the list of people who had already completed the exam, and Adrien was already on that list. Instructor Adam was very shocked. He could not understand how a first-year student passed this test alone in only 23 minutes. Even though Adrien had shown an incredible result at the qualifying round, Adam still couldn't believe that a 17-year-old boy was capable of such a thing. Then the instructor decided to watch the recording of the test. The video showed a huge crowd of goblins and orcs attacking the guy at the same time. Adrien was completely relaxed and simply began to massage his shoulder. And then, after a couple of seconds, he suddenly started running towards the crowd. The monsters also did not stop moving towards the guy. Instantly approaching the crowd, Adrien swung his sword straight at the crowd, his eyes flashing with madness. He struck and hit several goblins at once. At that moment, one monster was crawling along the ceiling and approaching Adrien in the hope that he would not notice it. But for Adrien, this was nonsense. With the next blow, he cut the goblin's head open. After that, his face seemed to take on an incredibly calm look. Immediately after all the monsters were destroyed, two huge orcs appeared in front of the guy. They immediately tried to hit the guy at the same time, swinging and hitting with large bats. But the blow was made on the floor, which even cracked after the blows. At this time, Adrien, who was able to dodge the blow very easily, had already jumped on the monsters from behind, swinging his sword. Again, with one blow he destroyed these two thugs. The guy killed all the monsters in his path without getting tired. The teachers watching all this were simply in incredible shock. And then the last round came. A huge metal golem appeared in front of Adrien. Adam knew that this was a special golem, designed specifically for the exams, and it was designed just right for the strength of 8 people. The golem suddenly tried to hit the guy with its huge hand, but the guy just grinned and was already preparing to strike with his blade. He channeled all his magic into his sword and delivered an incredibly powerful blow straight into the golem's body. The monster was immediately defeated and began to disappear. At this point, the exam was over for Adrien. Adam realized that first place rightfully went to this guy. After some time, other teams began to emerge from the dungeon, having completed the exam. Some students were depressed and tired, while others emerged from the test with enthusiasm. Roxy had also long since finished her midterm exam dungeon. And so, some time passed, and already in the teacher's room, Chris began to look at the lists of those who had passed. He was shocked when he saw the results. The teacher spoke to Adam, saying that, as expected, Adrien was in first place. The instructor replied that it was indeed obvious. Everyone knew this guy would come in first place, but no one expected him to be able to pass the test so quickly and on his own. Adam said that if Adrien grows up and comes into the industry, Korea could have a title called One Again. Chris asked Adam if he understood for sure that this title was the title of the strongest contractor in the world, to which the instructor answered positively. The instructor came out of his thoughts and said that most likely such thoughts came to his mind because they had not had any geniuses for a long time. After discussing Adrien, Chris said that it was also a big surprise that Roxy came in second. Adam didn't know what happened, but he was surprised that the girl went to take the exam alone, like Adrien. The girl also coped with the tests quite quickly, although she received many injuries. The instructor said he knew Roxy was very hardworking, but he didn't think she would go into the dungeon alone. Adam then pointed out that if this exam had been based on teamwork, Olivia would have definitely gotten the highest score. Despite Adrien and Roxy's high results, when the lists come out, Adam would be reluctant to advise others to follow their example, as ordinary students will not be able to replicate it. Chris completely agreed with Adam's opinion. The teacher recalled that when he worked at the Chojin Guild, he definitely didn't notice anything special about the girl. She just practiced a lot and diligently. After that, the thought came to his mind that Roxy decided to go to the dungeon alone because of Adrien. But he quickly discarded this assumption, as it seemed like nonsense to him. And so the next day, in Valhalla, they posted the lists of those who had taken the exam, and a crowd of students immediately ran to the stand to find out what score they had received. Bob Ventrick was also looking at the lists with Alice, and when he saw that Adrien was in first place, he became very angry. He asked the girl if Larry was already in Korea. The girl answered yes. Then the guy's eyes flashed with rage, and he ordered the girl to immediately call Larry and get ready to leave. And so they arrived at the meeting place with Larry. As soon as they entered the building, Bob was immediately stopped by Larry, who greeted him. The guy said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Bob and Larry sat down at the table, with Alice standing behind them, and Larry immediately attacked the food with a huge appetite. But at some point he stopped eating and, with his mouth full, asked Bob who this Adrien was that needed to be dealt with. Bob smirked and replied that Adrien was just a dumb freshman from the orphanage, but he had seriously embarrassed Bob and needed to be paid back. Larry listened attentively, continuing to stuff his mouth with meat. Then he asked abruptly if he could kill this Adrien. Bob said he was leaving it up to Larry to decide. Larry said that things are not as simple now as they used to be, and he needs to prepare the stage carefully. He then pointed his finger at the frightened Alice and said that last time, because of this girl, with whom he was then dealing, he had to fight with the Palace family. He then added that due to the rapidly spreading rumors, he had to kill a couple more people. Alice at this moment listened to all this and was incredibly scared. After he said this, he continued eating, saying that it was always very difficult to enter Valhalla. To all this, Bob replied that he would do everything in his power to set the stage. Larry laughed and said he expected a good reward for this. And so, a week passed. Adrien again carried the application to leave school this weekend. At some point, Barie contacted him, asking if it was true that he was resigning again, and the guy replied yes. Barie logically asked why he was bringing the statement again if he had already come out this week, and Adrien replied that there were nuances here. Adrien said that he heard that if you do well on your midterms or finals, you will be allowed to leave Valhalla again. The guy was determined to find his remaining notes? Barie asked where exactly the guy was heading, and then the weekend came. The guy went to Suwon. He walked forward along the path, looking at his phone. He looked at his phone, looking for the route, and finally found it. The guy was suddenly distracted by the voice of the man who was standing right in front of him. The guy looked up and saw a big guy named Larry standing in front of him. Around this time, at the market where Adrien sold his jewelry, a black cat was watching everything that was happening from the window of his skyscraper. He just stood there and did nothing but spy. But suddenly his calm was broken by a message from the system, which said that the constellation on the other side was asking when the ring would arrive. The man replied that it would be here soon, that it was already going through standard procedures and would arrive through the portal. Suddenly, something began to happen that the black cat did not expect. Identical messages began to arrive in the system without stopping in large quantities. The man saw such behavior from the constellation for the first time. While he was thinking, something began to appear in the portal. The owner quickly approached the portal and began to examine what had just arrived. Opening the box, he saw that it was the very ring that had caused all the fuss. The black horse was very happy that the ring had finally arrived. He hoped that the constellation would calm down when it received the ring. At that very second, he called the constellation. A message quickly appeared from the system, saying that the constellation was here. Let's get back to what's going on between Adrien and Larry. As soon as Larry stopped Adrien on the road, Adrien immediately asked who was standing in front of him. Larry just laughed at this and asked Adrien if he really needed to know this. Adrien said quite calmly that he assumed Larry wanted something from him. Larry said the guy was smart, so why else would he meet him on a remote mountain peak? Adrien asked. Did Larry come here to get rid of the guy? To which he grinned and said once again that Adrien was insightful. Adrien had already taken off his briefcase and started to throw it on the ground, saying that it was not a matter of insight at all. He added that anyone would have guessed this if they had seen Larry. Then he said that he realized this a couple of days ago. Larry was already at the limit of rage. He called the guy very rudely and prepared to attack. He gathered his strength into a fist, jumped, and swung at the guy. Adrien, as usual, dodged the attack with ease. This caused Larry's fist to hit the tree trunk straight. The tree cracked from such a strong blow. Soon the tree fell down completely. Adrien watched all this calmly, and this made Larry smile. Larry said the guy was very lucky, and the guy said it had nothing to do with it, it was just a very slow hit. But this blow made Adrien think. He realized that Larry was very strong and reminded him of Jon. He understood that with such a fragile body as his now, it was better not to get hit by such blows. After that, he smiled and decided that the strategy for this fight would be very simple. The guy just turned around and started running. Larry was surprised. But a second later, Larry laughed and ran after the guy. Larry thought that in this situation, running was actually a good choice because if you didn't run away, you would be beaten to death. Larry then swung his fist at the guy and shouted that he would not let him go. But at that very moment, he stopped because Adrien's fist was already right in front of his face. Until the fist was so close, the guy didn't even notice that Adrien was approaching. He was shocked. And then Adrien delivered an incredibly strong punch to the guy's face, and Larry flew back a long distance. After a hard fall, lying on the ground, Larry opened his eyes and saw that another attack from Adrien was approaching. Adrien had a crazy look on his face and raised his leg right above the guy's face, ready to strike. And so he tried to step sharply on the guy. But Larry, although he had not yet recovered from the previous blow, deftly dodged the blow at the last second. The kick was delivered to the ground, exactly where Larry's head had been lying a moment ago. Larry moved from a lying position to a sitting position. He looked at the place where Adrien's foot landed. He was shocked to see that the ground from his impact had formed a hole and cracked. Adrien, mocking Larry, said that Larry was just lucky to dodge it. Larry didn't like these words at all. He started to bare his teeth. Larry stood up, then he asked Adrien what he did. Adrien smirked and said that he was the best in Valhalla, and it would be useful for Larry to know that. This made Larry even more angry. He wondered what the guy had been injecting himself with to become so strong. Let's fast forward to Larry's childhood, which took place in the Ventri family home. Larry's parents used his talent to raise their status a little. They forced him to drink a huge amount of different elixirs, since his talent is an innate affinity for elixirs. Larry drank everything his relatives gave him over and over again. They bought him elixirs that cost hundreds of millions. By the age of 16, the boy had become stronger than an adult. His parents wanted to use him to gain recognition for their family, But none of them expected that Larry would go against their system because he would not want to spend his whole life under control, and this happened. He dealt cruelly with his own mother. Larry then brutally killed his father. Larry thought that his strength was unrivaled, so why should he worry about his family's recognition? When Kayla learned about this incident, she was furious, but after calming down, she made the right decision for herself. Larry was then banished from the Ventri family. But the guy didn't care about it. He started carrying out orders for murders, and after that, he had good money. After breaking up with his family, he even became stronger. When Bob Ventri placed the order and offered a huge sum, Larry's interest in Adrien was not limited to money. He became genuinely interested in Adrien. Adrien attracted such widespread interest because he took first place in the Valhalla qualifiers, and also because he sent all the guild representatives to hell. Larry just wanted to amuse himself by playing with Adrien for a bit. But something went wrong in Larry's plan. He didn't understand, and in the end, he was the one who got beaten up. Larry couldn't figure out who this guy was. Wiping the blood from his face, Larry asked Adrien what he had been taking to become so strong. He added that he doubted there were any elixirs that were so cheap that an orphan like Adrien could afford them. To which Adrien simply said the word "what?" Then Adrien laughed really hard at this, which left Larry stunned. After calming down his laughter a little and brushing the tears of laughter from his face, Adrien asked if Larry meant steroids. Then Adrien said that Larry was just a crook who pumped himself full of some crap, which made Larry angry. Larry asked if the guy meant to say that he became so strong without the help of elixirs. Afterwards, Adrien rolled up his sleeves and told Larry that he had become strong through hard training and exercise. Adrien also said that he can compare Larry to Jon, but he believes that comparing a natural-born strongman and someone like Larry is not worth it. These words made Larry even more angry. He began to shake with rage. Then Larry grabbed the hilt of his blade. Adrien watched this completely calmly. Larry began to pour magic into the blade, and himself, he was already standing in a pose indicating readiness for battle. Adrien was confused by the guy's aura. He wondered if it was really magical power. Larry felt himself getting stronger with every passing second, and his eyes flashed with rage. Before Larry could finish his speech, he raised his head and saw Adrien flying towards him with another blow. Adrien's knee landed squarely on the side of Larry's jaw. This incredibly powerful blow sent Larry flying back quite a distance. Larry would have flown further, but he crashed into a tree with his back, at which time Adrien said that only very stupid people would wait until their opponent was preparing to attack. Without wasting a second, Adrien was already swinging his fist to deliver another punch to the guy's face. Larry didn't have time to dodge, and this strong punch flew straight into his face, from which the tree he had crashed into earlier broke. Adrien grabbed the guy by the hair and lifted him up a little, ignoring Larry's requests, and stopped. Adrien squatted down next to Larry, still holding him by the hair. He said that the guy shouldn't pass out yet, called him an idiot swallowing elixirs. The guy grinned and added that he would have forgiven the offender if he had just wanted to fight him. But Larry said that he wanted to get rid of him. Shaking his fist, Adrien said he wanted to ask something. Larry tried to say something but was instantly cut off by a punch to the face from Adrien, whose face took on a mad look. Let's move to the Valhalla dorms, and more specifically to Bob Ventri's room. Bob sat on his couch thinking that Larry had probably dealt with Adrien by now, a thought that made Bob very happy. He also, knowing Larry's character, was sure that he would not only beat Adrien, but also kill him. But it would still be difficult to clean up after him. It's good that it didn't happen at school. Then Bob, with a joyful smile on his face, called Alice and ordered her to order him a car. And finally, Bob's phone started vibrating. It was Larry calling. Bob was in anticipation of good news. Bob picked up the phone and immediately asked if Larry had dealt with Adrien yet. He heard nothing in response, began to worry and try to call Larry to the phone. But then he heard Larry making terrible wheezing sounds and unable to say anything, which scared Bob. Then he heard a voice that suggested Bob didn't understand what was happening. It turned out that the voice belonged to Adrien. Bob immediately recognized it when he heard it. Then Larry's wheezing could be heard again, to which Adrien said that he would now try to translate what the beaten man was saying. Adrien then mockingly said that Larry was asking for 2 candles to be lit for him if he died. Then Adrien told Bob to wait for him. Ventri was incredibly scared after what Adrien said. He took it as a threat. In response, Adrien did not hear anything from Bob. He asked if Ventri could hear him, but after these words he heard a dial tone on the phone. It was Bob hanging up, ending the conversation. Adrien laughed and said that it was very rude to hang up right away and called Bob a bastard. Having finished talking with Ventri, Adrien stood up and began to think about what he should do with this beaten guy. At this point, Bob Ventri was sitting nervously on his couch, wondering what had just happened and what to do next. and Alice brought him some hot tea. Coming closer to Bob, she repeated again that the tea was ready, but Ventric did not answer this time either. But after repeating her words again, Alice heard Bob start shouting, telling the girl to shut her mouth. The girl listened to Bob, said okay and left. This situation makes Bob even more angry. Bob sat there repeating Adrien's name over and over again, completely confused as to why his plan had failed. He sat and thought about how he couldn't even imagine such an outcome of events. He didn't know what to do next and how to finally deal with Adrien. Bob realized that the guy was behind all this. He began to blame Larry for everything that happened. Then Bob realized that this situation would definitely reach the Ventric family. It was only a matter of time, he was afraid, because everything got out of control that day. But at that very second, a brilliant idea came into his head. He realized that everything might not be so bad yet. Bob figured that since the guy was an orphan from the bottom, there was no way he could contact his family, and they certainly didn't find out anything. But Bob still decided that it would be better to lie low and just keep an eye on Adrien for now. Let's return to Adrien, who was already walking along the forest path, leaving Larry in proud solitude. At that moment, Barie contacted him and asked if the guy had forgotten his sword, even though it was stupid. Adrien replied that he would post the video when no one would expect it. Barie listened attentively and decided to ask why he didn't just kill then. Adrien replied that in his past life, 300 years ago, he would have done exactly that. But now it might be a problem, since he was an ordinary student. Barie suddenly remembered what he wanted to say and said that he was worried about something. He said he was worried specifically about the magic Larry had tried to use. This magic was surprisingly very familiar to Barie. He told Adrien about it. The guy, of course, asked Barie about it right away, but he said that if he had released more magic, Barie would have been able to tell for sure. But he was sure that he was familiar with such magic. Barie asked Adrien if he felt anything. The guy remembered that 300 years ago, monsters sacrificed cows and dogs to use such black magic, and Barie responded that Adrien was not very good at judging people by their magic. The guy got angry at this and ordered Barie to shut up. Then, Adrien suggested that the other side of the blade that guy Larry was talking about was connected to that power. Barie said that was quite possible. After Adrien and Larry's fight, when Larry was already beaten, Adrien asked who sent the guy to attack him. But Larry couldn't speak because of his broken jaw. He let out a growl. After this, Adrien realized that he had knocked the guy's jaw out, and at this rate he wouldn't get an answer. Then he quickly grabbed Larry by the jaw and put it back in with a deft movement of his hands. Larry then touched his jaw with his hand and realized that he could speak. Adrien repeated his question again. Larry didn't even know if he should answer it. Receiving no answer, Adrien sighed deeply. He squatted down in front of Larry, took his hand and said that he had put his jaw back in so that he would answer his questions. Adrien's eyes flashed with anger again, and he told the guy that silence was clearly not the best solution in this situation. Larry didn't understand what Adrien wanted to do. He asked him in fear why he was holding his fingers. Immediately after this question, Adrien, with a smirk on his face, sharply pulled the guy's hand. Larry started screaming loudly. His finger had just been broken. Adrien told the guy to speak faster before he broke the rest of his fingers. Larry thought about it, grinned, and replied that Bob Ventric hired him. Adrien thought he wondered if Bob had gotten to him last time or not. Then Adrien, saying that the guy didn't look like a Valhalla student, asked more questions about who Larry himself was and where he worked. Larry chuckled, saying that Adrien would certainly not be satisfied with such an answer, but he himself would sooner or later find out the answers to these questions. Quite calmly, Adrien threatened to break Larry's second finger as well. After that, the smile disappeared from Larry's face. He fearfully replied that he was Larry from the first kind of the Ventric family, who carries out orders as a hired hand. Adrien thought he had heard that answer somewhere before, and he asked Larry mockingly if he enjoyed being a mercenary or just a paid hooligan. Larry, without answering this, asked Adrien a counter question, calling him just a lucky guy. Are all people trash in the guy's eyes? Without waiting for an answer, Larry immediately said that the constellation that the first species works with is the other side of the blade. But of course, Larry also has a contract with it. Feeling more confident, Larry said that if he had managed to charge his magic, the outcome of the fight could have been completely different. Adrien laughed and said that if Larry had shut up after answering the questions, the guy would have left him just like that. But Larry believed in himself too much. Adrien grabbed Larry's jaw again, but this time to knock it back, and then he walked away. And so, on his way back home, Adrien was looking for information about this group of mercenaries. Everyone said that they were very evil. Adrien was upset that he still couldn't find his notes, and Bob still wouldn't leave him alone. Adrien thought about how he could deal with this Ventric. He realized that he needed to use technology. Even during the conversation with Larry, he managed to turn on the dictaphone and record everything. Then Adrien began to think about where to upload all these records. He decided to call Lilia. She clearly did not expect a call. She picked up the phone instantly. Her eyes lit up with hope. She asked if Adrien was calling her because he had finally decided to become her assistant. Adrien replied that it was not that. He wanted to know if Lilia knew any journalists. The very next day, all the newspapers carried the news that a former member of the Ventric family had attacked a freshman on orders from Bob Ventric, but the student was able to fight back. Reading this, Adrien said that this is what he calls modern war. Barie told him that for a man who lived 300 years ago, Adrien had somehow become too accustomed to modern technology. Adrien replied that after reincarnation it was difficult for him at first, but he mostly scrolled through social networks and watched the news, and this helped him. Reading all the news about yesterday, Adrien realized that he wanted to take revenge only on Bob, but it turned out that he had screwed the entire Ventric family. Then, Adrien thought about the fact that the reporter that Lilia introduced him to turned out to be an important person. Adrien did not think that this story would take such a turn, and then he came across a video with an address from the head of the Ventric family. In this appeal, Kayla said that she offered her deepest apologies to the attacked student and the entire Valhalla Academy. She then said that the attack was carried out by Larry, who had already been expelled from the Ventric family. Larry himself also later said that the statement that Bob Ventric was the customer was false, and that by initially slandering Bob, Larry was simply trying to get out of the situation. Because of this, they believed that the Ventric family was not involved in the incident. But the attack was carried out by a former member of the Ventric family, so they can't just ignore what happened. Kayla said that as the head of the Ventric family, she would personally visit the victim and apologize to him. She went on to say that even if Bob was not involved in the attack, they believed he was still connected to the attacker. They brought him home to conduct an internal investigation into the Ventric family. They will try their best to eliminate all unnecessary suspicions. After these words, she bowed to everyone as a sign of respect and left. As she was leaving, all the reporters were shouting and asking questions, trying to stop Kayla, but she didn't even look at them. Bob himself also saw this official appeal. He was incredibly scared by what he heard. He continued to stare at the phone, and suddenly his father called him. Bob picked up the phone and greeted him. Father told Bob that he had to return to England for a while. It was a family order. Bob agreed, although this scared him even more. Bob was very angry at what was happening. He began to squeeze the phone. Trembling went through his body. Alice, standing nearby, simply looked down at the floor and did not move. And then the next day came. Adrien watched the video of Larry being taken away by law enforcement and reporters asking questions. In this video, Larry was saying that the Ventric family is right, and he is the only one who stands behind the attack. Adrien was surprised that Larry swallowed his pride so quickly. The Ventric family really pissed Adrien off. As he walked to class, he thought that meeting the head of the Ventric family and her apology would be very awkward, and just thinking about it made Adrien feel sick. Soon he remembered about Lilia's help. He decided to invite her to a cafe. When they met there, Lilia's eyes sparkled with joy again. And Adrien just calmly drank his drink and, noticing how Lilia was looking at him, said no. Lily jumped up from her seat and asked how the guy knew what she wanted to ask, and Adrien replied that it was obvious. Then Lilia, pretending to be offended, asked why Adrien had called her then. Without waiting for the guy's answer, she jumped up from her seat again and exclaimed questioningly that maybe this was a date, and Adrien told her to wake up. Lily asked when they had managed to switch to the informal you. Adrien replied that they had been communicating like this for a long time. He went on to say that he had not called her because he was bored, but because he wanted to thank her for introducing him to the journalist. He said that he would give her some information about fighting monsters. Lilia couldn't believe her ears. She was incredibly happy. The guy then said he would tell her more if she helped him leave school this weekend. Lilia said it would be easy as pie. She added that if he became her assistant, he would be able to leave school every day, but the guy refused again. Let's move to the northern part of the Pacific Ocean, where a ship was already sailing, carrying prisoners. Larry was one of them, sitting in a holding cell with his hands cuffed behind his back. Larry was angry. He didn't think he would be put on a ship and transported as cargo. He thought he might be being taken to a prison tower in the North Pacific Ocean. Once upon a time, the S-rank constellation independently created this shelter of deprivation, this prison that turns contractors into ordinary people. But he quickly came to the conclusion that none of this mattered. He thought he just needed to shut up and sit still so that Bob could remain in the Ventric family. And if he does this, his sentence will be reduced to 5 years. His thoughts were interrupted by a voice from behind calling Larry an ugly face. Larry immediately turned his head towards the sound, and at that very moment his throat was cut with one movement of the hand. The guy screamed and started coughing up blood. The man who did this continued to stand next to him and look at Larry. Then he told Larry to die, calling him a fool, adding that the first species did not need such people. After these words, Larry immediately fell face down on the floor and died. The man looked at the boy's lifeless body for a while and left. Let's move on to the Ventri family estate. At this time, Kayla met Bob and his father with a displeased face. Bob and his father entered Kayla's office and bowed in respect. Kayla said the guy's name menacingly. Bob was very scared and sweat started pouring down his face. Kayla asked Bob what he was going to do now, to which the guy simply said he was sorry. To this, the girl said that a simple apology would not fix the situation. This made the guy even more tense. He was afraid to even breathe. Kayla then asked the boy to tell her what exactly made him do something so evil. Not receiving a clear answer, she asked if he wanted to deal with Adrien. Bob answered positively. Kayla was angry that the guy didn't tell her anything himself, and she had to ask a lot of leading questions herself. She stood up from her seat, saying that the boy had thought that Adrien had hurt the pride of the Ventri family. But in fact, it was only Bob's own pride that had been hurt. Getting close enough to Bob, she said that he was the one who dragged the Ventri family name through the mud. She leaned over Bob and asked menacingly what they should do now. Bob fell to his knees and said he would do anything to restore their family's honor. Kayla straightened up and said the guy was talking bird. The only way to restore his reputation was to expel Bob from the family. And hearing this, the boy became even more frightened. Then Bob's father intervened in the conversation and told the chief that this would be too cruel. To this, the head said that then she could kick out Bob's father too. After this, the man himself became scared. The head mistress said arrogantly that she would kill or kick Bob out of the family right now. But she knew that then everyone would know for sure that Bob was the one who hired Larry and tried to kill the student. She said Bob's name again, and he responded obediently. Kayla said that she wasn't kicking him out yet. She ordered him to return to Valhalla and keep his mouth shut there. The leader was going to think about what happened again when she met Adrien. Bob bowed to Kayla again and thanked her. Before Bob and his father left, Kayla told the man to keep a better eye on his son, as his punishment would depend on his son's actions. And so they left the office of Chief Kayla Ventri. Bob and his father were walking down the hallway, very angry about what was happening. The father decided to start the conversation by telling Bob to keep a low profile and not do anything rash. To this, Bob asked, hadn't his father heard what the chief had told them? Then, without waiting for an answer, Bob said that sooner or later, he would be kicked out anyway when everything calmed down. But before that, he had to do something, because now nothing could stop him. Then he said that his father would have to help him, and his father looked at his son in silence, not knowing what to answer. After a couple of seconds, the father finally answered, saying that the main thing was that no one found out. Bob agreed with this. And now, several days have passed since the recent events. Adrien and teacher Chris were already sitting in the interrogation room. The teacher said that the head of the Ventri family would arrive soon to apologize to the guy. Adrien said that they had nothing in common. She even publicly stated in an official announcement that the incident had nothing to do with the Ventri family. Chris replied that it was still her moral duty to apologize to the guy. She had come all the way to Korea for this. Adrien thought that the leader would come here because she had no other choice, and so she wanted to take Bob's punishment upon herself. Thinking about it, Adrien realized that all this was terribly irritating to him. His face expressed displeasure. Chris said he and the other instructors were also upset about it. Chris tried to reason everything out. First, they attacked a Valhalla student. Then the attacker admitted that he was hired by Bob Ventri, but then they denied everything he said. The teacher said he couldn't believe they were downplaying Adrien's recorded confession simply to protect the family and hide the truth. He added that Bob or the head of the family should be punished anyway, but their family had recently donated a large sum of money to the school. Chris just couldn't believe that Valhalla's budget was made up of donations from large families, and if they gave enough money, the school would most likely turn a blind eye. Adrien was completely calm. He said that if that was the case, then he should talk to the head of the Ventri family. Chris was very surprised that Adrien had such a calm reaction. And finally, there was a knock on the door. Chris whispered that the boss was here, and he would open the door now to let her in. He stood up, wished the guy a pleasant conversation, and went to the door. The teacher opened the door slightly, and Kayla's haughty grin was already visible through the crack. When the door opened fully, Chris met the lady and bowed to her as a sign of respect. He decided not to detain anyone and left the room, telling them not to hurry. The girl thanked him for his hospitality. And so Chris left, closing the door behind him, and the head of the family was already heading towards Adrien and stood opposite him. She greeted the guy, saying that she was pleased to meet him. She informed him that she was the head of their family. Adrien replied that he was also very pleased to meet you. After these words, Kayla majestically sat down on the sofa opposite Adrien. Adrien relaxed a little after that. And so she began her speech talking about what happened because of Larry. She bowed her head deeply and apologized profusely to the guy. Adrien said that since Larry had already been banished, everything was fine. Kayla continued by saying that she heard that the Ventric family was giving Adrien a hard time even at school. The boy replied that it was only that one time, so it didn't matter now. Adrien said that he had nothing to say since the official statement from the head said that the incident had nothing to do with their family. Kayla listened to this silently. Kayla said that in this situation, neither the forces nor ordinary citizens trust them. Adrien scratched his ear and said that this was exactly the case, but he himself knew that it was all a lie. After that, Kayla smirked and told the guy that she wanted to resolve the misunderstandings between them. She asked if Adrien would help her. The guy, without thinking, answered that he wouldn't do it. But Kayla said that she knew Adrien would answer that way. She said that if the guy helps them now, she will give him full support until graduation. She then added that she could recommend the boy to a guild that the Ventric family sponsored, so they could continue to support him after he graduated. She would also help Adrien become a hunter in Korea so he wouldn't have any difficulties. Adrien smirked as he listened to this. Adrien, after waiting for Kayla to finish her speech, mockingly said that no one expected that she would try so hard to drag him out. He assumed that the leader was in despair. Kayla, hearing this, was no longer so friendly. Her face changed dramatically. The guy then went on to say that it really pissed him off that Kayla and the entire Ventric family were pretending like nothing had happened. So why would the guy play along? Adrien then added that he didn't want a reward. His only wish was to see the Ventric family live with the shame that Bob caused. These words made Kayla incredibly angry. Her face took on a furious look. She called the guy trash. The magic of the head of the family began to come out so strongly that her hair even stood up. She asked if the guy even knew who he was talking to now. Adrien chuckled and said that apparently the girl had finally decided to show her true face, and it must have been difficult for her to contain it. Kayla was not going to calm down. She continued to menacingly say that she came to this dump called school to make it easier to convince Adrien, and he dares to behave so arrogantly. Her eyes flashed with rage and she said that she just needed to kill Adrien here and now. She said that she wanted to be generous and give the guy a good chance, but he just refused it. Adrien listened to all this with a satisfied look. When threatened with murder, the boy mockingly told Kayla to give it a try. The head of the Ventric family did not expect such calmness from Adrien. She asked the guy again, "What was he saying?" Adrien raised his head proudly and asked, "Didn't the girl say that the Ventric family had nothing to do with the attack? But then why, in order to reinforce this lie, did she decide to spend a huge amount of money on him, and now she even wants to kill him?" Adrien then said that he thought that was all Kayla could do, and the girl listened to this and became angrier with every word he said. There was no response from the girl. Adrien, continuing to be in a completely relaxed state, said that if she attacked him, she still would not be able to kill her. The head of the family's magic was still leaking out, and his hair was raised up during the entire conversation. But suddenly the girl returned to a completely calm appearance, calmed her magic, and her hair fell back to its previous state. Kayla quickly walked to the exit, opened the door, and before leaving, told the guy that he would regret this. Adrien smirked again and said that she couldn't do anything after all and was just chatting away. At this point, Barie contacted the guy. He said that he did not want to interfere, but decided to ask if the guy really had to do this. Adrien replied that the creatures who think that everyone should fall at their feet are what irritate him the most. His eyes flashed with anger again as he said he knew what Kayla was going to do, calling her trash who was trying to put everyone on a chain. Then Adrien said that this is why he also hates Barie. The constellation was taken aback by such an answer. Right after that, Adrien stood up and went to the exit. He thought that since there were no more lessons today, he could go to the training room a little earlier. And now he was approaching the hall where he was supposed to have training with Roxy. Looking up from his phone, Adrien saw Roxy talking to some guy. He decided to take a closer look at that guy, thinking that maybe it was someone he knew, but he still couldn't figure out who it was. As Adrien got closer, he heard the guy telling Roxy that she wouldn't be able to win the competition. He said that no matter how much Roxy trained, it still wouldn't help her against him. The guy then extended his hand towards Roxy, saying that if she wanted to stay in the family, she just needed to not be a whimsical person. He waited for the girl to answer and added that he didn't want to humiliate her. Roxy listened to all this with a very disappointed look. But suddenly the girl said no to this proposal from Roxy's older brother. The brother was very surprised at what was happening. He assumed a more confident stance, saying that he was giving the girl one last chance. So why did she refuse so easily? And so Roxy finally decided to answer the guy, gathering her strength. But as soon as she started to speak, she was interrupted by a voice that said that it was the guy himself who did not understand something, since he was an idiot. The brother couldn't believe that he was being contradicted. He exclaimed, "Who is calling him an idiot?" And suddenly Adrien appeared from behind Roxy, pointing his finger at the offender. He said that he was the idiot, because he did not leave the person alone, who worked very hard. The girl's brother's face changed and he asked why Adrien was calling him names if he didn't even know who he was talking to. Adrien noted that today, he sees too many people bragging about their status, and Adrien doesn't care at all who stands in front of him. The guy confidently told the guy not to dare bother students within the school anymore, and if he had finished his speech, then he should get lost. Then he asked Roxy if she agreed with him. Roxy immediately began nodding her head up and down in agreement. Then Roxy's brother could no longer object. He threateningly told Roxy that they would meet at the test. Immediately after that, the guy left and the two looked after him. Roxy immediately thanked Adrien, to which he told her that it was nothing special and suggested that she start training faster. But Roxy wanted to continue the conversation and said that when she agreed in the conversation, she would actually have said something different. Then Adrien asked what she had answered. She said she wouldn't tell him to get lost, she would just tell him who his mother was. But before she could finish, Adrien stopped her. As they walked towards the gym for training, they discussed that they would work hard today, since both would not be able to meet at the next training session. Fast forward to what's happening in Shinhyun, near the hills a week later. Adrien was already walking along the path among the trees with a shovel on his back, looking for the place where her notes were buried. On the way, Barie contacted him and asked the guy if he was going to look for his notes. Adrien answered yes. Barie asked why he needed this, if he had already found enough relics and stones in his old notes last time. The guy replied that he wanted to know how many were left. Adrien said that he thought that if he kept looking, he would find something incredible there. Barie asked again what exactly the guy meant. The guy replied that if he found something like that, he would be able to overcome the shortcomings that he had 300 years ago. Then, turning to Barie, the guy said that if he had found him earlier than 300 years ago, maybe he would not have killed him. At this time, reporters had already gathered near the Chojin family estate. They were heatedly discussing this family's selection day today. Rocky and her brother Drake were already standing in front of their father, waiting for the competition to begin. And then the father finally announced the start of the test, saying that he would now tell the rules. Looking at Drake, he said that, as he had already said, whoever passed the test would be considered the heir. He then looked at Roxy and said that whoever failed the test would be banished from their family. He then asked if Roxy and Drake were ready to begin. The guy and the girl simultaneously said that they were ready. Then the father said that the purpose of the test would be to find the double blade hidden in the mountains. The person who finds it and brings it to his father will be considered the winner. Then the father clarified that it didn't matter how they got this blade, the main thing was that they couldn't kill each other. And then the father abruptly announces the start of the test. Roxy confidently begins to run in search. Drake just smirked, looking at the girl, and said that this was not a timed test. His plan was to take the blade from the girl when she found it and take it to her father. He remembered the moment when he left Roxy and Adrien. As he walked away from them, his phone rang. Drake picked up the phone and said he was listening. The voice on the other end of the call asked what was going on with the double blade. The guy said he would have to take a selection test, so it would take a little longer. The voice said that the guy was telling him this for the second time. Then the voice said that the guy was already late on time. Drake got nervous. He quickly began to apologize to his opponent, but he dared to ask whether the man would fulfill his promise if he could obtain the blade. The man replied that it was a promise made in front of the constellation, so he was obliged to keep it. Drake said goodbye to the man and became even more focused on his goal. He thought that this was his last chance, so it was time to go. Roxy was already looking for this blade at this time. The girl emitted mana around herself. She felt the trace of the double blade's magic.